Are you guys ready to go? Everybody? Rick? You ready? All right, we will reconvene public meeting number 143 at about 1:45. And let's see, did you resolve your issues? We had asked Penn to stick, ask those folks to stick around if you wanted to pursue your issues. Or
No, I was just, let's come back to that
Okay.
later.
Okay, do you want to introduce your next set of guests, Director Day?
I actually will refer to Matt and have him do the introduction and,
Okay.
if you would each state your name again for the record, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Matt Sedor with GTEC, Regional Vice President of Operations. With me is Jackie Mancini, Legal Counsel for GTEC.
Hi, my name's Ethan Tower. I'm the Protocol Director for GSA, Gaming Standards Association.
I know you.
Eric Lennon and Vanessa
Yeah.
also from MGC.
Okay. Do you guys have comments, or do you want questions, or how do you want to start?
So I think what we wanted to do is respond to some of the concerns, and I'll let Matt touch on some of the issues, but I just wanted to clarify on a few things procedurally. The licensing issue that Director Wells brought up, we don't intend on licensing the CMS side because we'll be paying them. The only people we license are the ones that are paid by the industry. So we'll do background checks like we do with all of our other vendors, just like our oversight project managers have gone through. The consultants that reviewed the applications will do thorough background checks, and that will be the process for that. I think it's a good idea for us to sit down and work out the protocols as well as the system architecture and database security that's required. So we'll work out that, and then we can always bring in a outside vendor to test against those protocols. We're doing it right now. We have a outside vendor engaged that has done some penetration testing and done some protocol testing on our license management system. They did it on all of our own security architecture. So we already have that engagement. We'll just include this in the scope of it. There are a lot of issues I'll let Matt deal with. The ideas of there's no precedent for a distributed floor or a distributed environment. I think GTEC does have experience. They've done that in multiple jurisdictions, while it may not be on one single floor. In the meeting that we had, that was a long 2.5 hour meeting where we went over a lot of these issues, it became clear that it's not a CMS issue. It seems like it's the software and the application that the operator is using. So in Maryland, they do have a environment, one facility where they are monitoring a couple hundred G2S. So we've already established, and I think people here have said the SAS floor is pretty consistent. It's pretty stable with the CMS. And in Maryland, GTEC is monitoring a floor that has 200 machines or 200 EGDs on the G2S protocol, and the floor has never gone down.
On a hybrid floor that has 200, okay.
So it's a total of 800, as was reported by machines, and a couple hundred of those are G2S. And the floor has never gone down. Neither the operator nor the CMS has brought the floor down. You have something different happening at MGM where 32 machines brought a floor down. So I don't think this is a problem with the CMS, to tell you the truth. Being impartial, listening to it, but you'll let the people from GSA and GTEC have that conversation with you. One of the other ideas that was brought into question was the business case and the return on investment. That issue was brought up at our meeting, so I was shocked to hear it come up again. The discussion about rich data. The scenarios that we brought to you, the types of events that our gaming agents would have automated for them, and they wouldn't have to rely on the operator's systems, have the same prompts, same messages, same protocols coming out of the SAS protocol if we were to switch to that as they're coming out of the G2S protocol. So our return on investment doesn't change one bit. The business case doesn't change one bit.
In terms of the data, the suggestion that Mike made, I thought, or somebody made, was that, and I was going to ask this question, is if there were no G2S, forget GTS, there's just SaaS systems, does the management benefit to a regulator approximately the same?
It's the exact same. The G2S is mainly to the operators because they can push games down from a system, and I'll let the GSA expert talk about this. But from our standpoint, we're monitoring the same events. We're monitoring the same things we'd be doing manually, and we get those same things from the SaaS-based protocol.
But don't you have to give the operators who are afraid of G2S credit for being afraid of G2S?
Absolutely.
I mean, the reality is G2S could be the best thing in the world, but what I listened to them all this morning say, they're afraid of it. And they're afraid of its stability, and they're afraid of its ability to perform, and they're afraid of its ability to interact on a floor with a SaaS-based system. Now, that may be an irrational fear. My sense is that it isn't, but that may be irrational, but it's still a fact, right? That one has to take into account.
That is a fact, but that's a separate issue from whether the CMS can read the data.
I understand that. I understand that.
That's a regulation debate. What came up were a lot of questions about GTEC's product without any factual evidence about GTEC's product. So this is the problem I'm having.
I didn't hear questions about GTEC's product.
Whether they could interact with it, whether it would bring a system, a floor down. Those are the problems.
Well,
that
no, I
I'm
think
having.
the point was not the GTEC system. The point was the GTEC system imposition on an unstable G2S system.
Right.
It was, I referred to it as a force multiplier. It wasn't, at least the guts of the argument was not that there was something inherently wrong with the CMS. DeSalvio was quite explicit, that there are not any from his standpoint, but it's the imposition of the additional ports and the additional scale on an unstable G2S that was the issue.
Which, once again, I bring back as that's a regulation issue, not a central management system
Right,
issue.
I understand that. Right.
The question regarding the RFR, would this change it? No, the pricing hasn't changed. The types of systems are very similar.
Well, the ultimate objective hasn't changed. If it's a regulatory, necessarily, if it's a regulatory change, that may change the timing, but it does not necessarily
Doesn't
change
change
the
the
objective,
procurement.
because if there's stable G2S system comes out that makes people happy, then we could, even if we stop, we could reconsider going to a G2S CMS system if the stability of both parts was satisfied. So,
Correct. And we did answer that question on 5 separate occasions during the question and answer part of the RFR. Would it be compatible with a hybrid environment? And I'll end my comments there.
I think it'd be really a good opportunity for both Matt and Ethan to take up the discussion and talk particularly about hybrid floors and G2S. Why don't you go ahead and start?
I'll just talk a little bit about the technology, and then I'll defer it to Matt. He can talk about their experiences with the protocol. Unfortunately, the feedback we were getting from the operators today was based on one system in one location, and apparently it was installed back in 2009. There haven't been significant upgrades done to it in the past, and they're basing their, I guess, fears, as you said, based on that experience. And I'm not going to say that those fears aren't founded, because this is new technology for the manufacturers. Some of them have had a number of years, 5, 6, 7 years experience with the protocols now. Some of them are just starting their initial implementations of it. And so the fear that they have that they could get into, get it boxed into a corner because they want to get a product, but they're afraid of the implementation in that particular product is probably founded. And so I think there, could be some legitimate concerns there. I find it unfortunate they want to categorize every system and every product based on that experience with the one product that they've had, because I think, as Matt will say, their experience with the protocol is completely different. And they have, the number of installations out there, very large installations, where they're not having it, the type of problems that were described by the gentleman from MGM. In terms of the difference between G2S and SAS, I think, Derek says that, they could be very similar in terms of what's needed. That all comes down to what your requirements are for data, okay? At some point, you need to go through the exercise of looking at exactly which meters you need, what type of authentication of the software that you want to do on the machines, what type of events you're interested in, and then verify that those are in fact available through SAS and in fact available through G2S for that matter, right? That exercise has to take place, because when you get into all those details, there are some significant differences between SAS and G2S. There are places where G2S goes into a lot more depth and detail than is available through SAS. And so I think that exercise, though, will determine what will be available for SAS and whether that will, in fact, satisfy the requirements of the Commonwealth. My last comment has to do with certification. The GSA certification process is extremely rigorous. To get GSA certification, you actually have to meet 100% of the requirements in the functional areas you want to get certified for. You can opt into certain functional areas, but once you opt in, you've got to be 100% there. So it's not easy to get certified. There aren't very many certified GSA products out there. In fact, as you're aware, because MGM brought it up, GTEC has one of these certified GSA products, which was not an easy undertaking for them to get that. So it sort of bothered me a little bit, because they did infer that the products that are being used in Las Vegas were certified. And to the best of my knowledge, if it's a property I think they're talking about, none of those products were GSA certified and went through the level of rigorous testing that the GTEC system did. So I just want to make sure it's clear that when we start talking about certification, it is a very high standard that we put in GSA.
So does that mean to say that there are G2S systems that are deployed in Las Vegas that where the technology has not yet been GSA certified? They're sort of like beta sites or something?
Well, there's no requirement that a manufacturer get GSA certification to put a product in the field, right? It's like you don't have to necessarily go to Underwriters Laboratory to put a product out in the field. A lot of people prefer to get those certifications so that independent third parties looked at the product and verified that they work the way they're supposed to be, they work the way they're advertised, and then there aren't going to be any problems. And so, like I said, in fact, most of the products that are in the field that are G2S based are not certified. We would like them all to be certified. We have a certification program. We encourage all the manufacturers to take advantage of it. But for one reason or another, time to market, product capabilities, whatever it is, they have not become certified yet.
So these products are operator systems, for example, these G2S products that you talk about, or are they central monitoring systems?
They would typically be the operator systems as well as the gaming machines.
Okay.
In fact, a couple of the larger CMS vendors have gotten certified, GTEC being one of them. But yeah, I would say the majority of the products in the field right now have not been GSA certified, so they have not been looked at independently by one of the independent test labs to verify that they are 100% compliant and they do what they're supposed to do. Obviously, it would be from our standpoint at GSA, it would be a big move forward in the industry if we could get everybody to step up and do that.
Who's writing the G2S code? Who developed this? Was that GSA?
Yeah, well, GSA, just for background, is a trade organization. And so we have about 60, 65 members. They are manufacturers in the gaming industry, as well as some of the larger operators are members of GSA, so our funding comes from them. The guys who work on the technical committees and actually write the protocols, those are volunteers from those member organizations. And so those engineers get together, I referee it. They hash out what's needed, and then GSA, we actually publish the protocols. We do a lot of the editorial work and put the final documents together and manage the approval process. We follow a process that's very much like ISO. So when the protocols are done, they go out for member comment, they go out for vote. We have processes to deal with change
Right.
control and things like that.
So the pressure, the impetus to deploy G2S comes from the industry, I guess.
Correct.
I gather that this is a more efficient system for managing slot machines than, once it's good, once it's solid, than SAS is. And it's the industry that wants this to happen.
Yes.
It's the operators principally, is that right?
Correct. Yes, the manufacturers and the operators, and even as the gentleman from MGM stated, that they are fully behind G2S. It's the question of individual products, whether those individual products are up to their standards for their particular floors.
Right. Okay. Anything else?
Oh, I think that was it for me.
Matt, did you have?
I just had a couple of things. In the interest of time, I'll just try to give you some statements of fact, and if you have any questions on these, feel free to ask me. And I apologize because these are going to jump around a little bit, as our previous conversation kind of jumped around, and I just took notes as we went along. The first thing I would say, as Derek mentioned, Josh, during his statements, indicated that a hybrid floor does not exist in the industry today. In fact, it does in Maryland. It is one of Maryland's smaller properties of about 800 machines.
Is this the so-called Ocean Downs?
Ocean Downs, correct.
He did refer to that.
They've had a hybrid floor in operation since the end of 2012 with no issues. Our system has been in place since September of 2010. So there have been no issues with Maryland with that property running the hybrid floor. I think Mike did later state that, in fact, Ocean Downs was running a hybrid floor.
How many G2S machines are there out of the 800, do you know?
It's a couple hundred machines.
Did you talk to those people, did you say, or somebody? Okay. So G-Tech is saying there's no problems. Okay. It might be worth a phone call.
Yeah, and actually, if there were problems with the machines on the floor, we would see it go down in our system, and the regulator in Maryland would notify us of it. So we, from our own personal experience, know that there have been no problems, but I can also state factually, we've never received a notification from the regulator that there have been problems on the floor of that property.
Okay.
Josh made a number of references to the G2S system at their property being a fragile system that's not mature. The only thing that I would say there is that is not the same G-Tech system that we are talking about here. That's not the CMS that we're looking at for.
Sorry, I'm sorry. He was saying what was not mature? He was talking about,
The G2S, he kept referring to the G2S system.
which is in the EGDs, not the CMS system.
There's a system component to that they have in their property as well. And the only point I wanted to make is when he's saying the word system, he's not referring to G-Tech system. They don't have any G-Tech technology in
Yeah,
that property.
That was clear.
Yeah,
So
I
it's not
understood.
an apples-to-apples comparison.
Right.
Mike made a comment that he had a discussion with Mohegan Sun, and they referred to numerous outages at their property in Pennsylvania caused by the CMS in Pennsylvania. The CMS in Pennsylvania is a SAS-only CMS. That is just simply not true. The CMS has never caused a floor outage in a facility in Pennsylvania. I think that you got some comments from the representative from WIN. And Penn National has stated many, many times that in working with our system in Kansas, in Pennsylvania, and in Maryland, the system has never caused an outage on their facility floors. Lastly, in regards to this RFR and the G2S protocol, the RFR required a central monitoring system that could support 20,000 machines. It did not say 20,000 G2S machines. The RFR also required that the system support both the SAS protocol and the G2S protocol. So the system that GTEC would provide, if you choose to go in that direction, is a system that will support upwards of 20,000 machines and of both protocols. It doesn't matter to the system if you have 100% SAS, 100% G2S, or some mixture there in between. And as far as our experience with the G2S protocol, we've implemented 17 systems around the world that utilize the G2S protocol. They all operate today. We don't have issues that MGM has experienced in their facility in Las Vegas. 5 of those systems are in Canada, 12 of them are in Europe. And there are various reasons those regulators chose to go G2S primarily, and this is the key difference between those implementations in Massachusetts. Those implementations are very majority distributed implementations, which means they'll have a handful of machines in each environment. A couple of them have small casinos as well, so the system supports both on one system. But primarily, those jurisdictions are looking at G2S because it opens the door to do things like server-based gaming and downloading of game content, so that they don't need to have a field service staff that goes out to each machine if they want to change a game. And they get a benefit from the protocol by having the system automatically do things like that for them. But the fact of the matter is, it's running today. The largest of those implementations is in Sweden with 8,000 machines on a single system, and we don't have these problems. Thank you.
But in some of the comments made about the RFR, about the 20,000 machines, there was an implied notion that had the number of machines, if there were a less number of machines, not just the mix between the protocols, like 1250, because those are the ones that are imminent for PEN, that the system would be perhaps very different. Is that, would you concur
So
with
if
that?
the RFR required us to support only 1,250 machines instead of
Or
20,000?
less than 20,000, right. Call it 5,000.
The only difference would be the hardware to store data that you receive from the machines. It's a hardware scalability of the system. The software that we write for the system is there whether you have one machine or 30,000 machines. That doesn't matter. But you'll need more larger database, more disk space, possibly more memory as you add machines in order to support the reporting and data storage for those machines.
There was also another question relative to the number of connections, depending on, because of this hybrid, mix. 800 times 2 is 1,600, and maybe quadruple the number of connections given the protocol. The implication that I took from that is the more number of connections, the more likely that you could have a failure of whatever sort. Can you speak from your perspective to that?
I don't have any experience with how MGM has implemented their systems or network designs at their own properties. What I can say for Massachusetts, as with other jurisdictions, you have a separate network in place. So the network that they have that would be connected to their casino system is completely different than the network that would be in place to support the CMS. So the traffic is going in 2 different directions, and the networks don't mix with each other. They do at the end point, the machine, but when the machine sends a message to the system, it sends the message once, and it gets sent to both systems. So,
I didn't want to step on you, but I did have a similar question, which I thought was both naive and irrelevant, but maybe it's not. And that is whether the G2S system can be set up the way the SAS system is diagrammed there on the left,
To a splitter rather than two
to a
ports.
splitter rather than two independent ports.
I can't really comment on that diagram because despite the fact that it says GTEC at the top, it's not a GTEC diagram. So would you need a splitter?
Could you
No,
use a splitter?
Could you use a splitter instead of two separate connections? Or is two separate connections, which I understand is the right side, inherent in a G2S machine?
Well, in a G2S floor, you simply add a network card into the machine, and then it sends the same message over two different network ports. So the machine, in essence, is the splitter itself. You don't need to add another piece of hardware. That's why this diagram, I haven't seen it before. It wasn't created by GTEC. It's not something that we would provide as fact to the commission.
Well, on the same, one of the points was that the G2S system requires twice as many ports per EGD as the SAS system does, and that it's inherent in when you take the number of ports times the number of machines, that there's an inherent instability in that. There's an inherent risk that is related to the increased numbers of ports and machines.
I would disagree with.
Well, does it have to have two ports rather than one, like this diagram has it? And B, and maybe both of you can speak to this, is there something inherent about the multiplicity of ports times the scale of the number of machines that creates instability?
Maybe I could try, because I think Josh got at this a little bit too in his discussion. In fact, that diagram doesn't really represent sort of the standard picture if you take it out of the G2S book on how the network is configured. Typically, there is only one connection to the network, and then the traffic on the network is just routed to the correct servers.
Like on the left.
Kind of, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, usually there's just a connection from the machine that goes right up to the Ethernet, right up to the top level up there, because there's no need for any intermediary hardware. You just put the machine on the network, and typically, using all the fancy network technology they have today, they route and they filter and they firewall the information so it all ends up in the right place, and they manage the traffic on the network appropriately. So typically in a G2S implementation, you've only got one port on the machine, it connects to the network, and then network management tools are used to appropriately secure the data and make sure it ends up in the right places. Possibly the concern out of that, though, is that you're putting more traffic on the network.
Right.
I mean, that's probably where the concern is leading.
And the single port approach is what we've done in other jurisdictions that didn't require a separate network. But in this case, you're not doubling the traffic over a single network. By adding a second port to the machine, you're dividing that traffic into two separate networks. So does it create instability in a single network? No, not necessarily. You are adding a second port to the machine, but the machine's just sending the same message over both ports. So it's not doing anything that it's not already doing. You're adding a network card into the machine, which is not a significant upgrade to a machine. So in those jurisdictions where the regulators require a completely separate network, that's how we handle it. If a completely separate network is not required, then you just simply don't add the extra network card into the machine.
Oh, so
But it doesn't create a significant instability on one specific network because the transactions are already routed into two separate networks.
does anybody know whether we have, by regulation, implicitly required a separate network for this?
No, we have not, or no, we don't know.
We haven't, to our intention, to our knowledge, required anything.
Because
So it could be done either way, with one port or two, depending on the requirements of that jurisdiction?
For the G2S
Yes.
implementation, yes. I don't know that it works the same way for the SAS implementation. I think Josh made reference.
SAS isn't a problem.
You may need a separate network for the SAS implementation, is my point.
Oh,
So your point is that the diagram on the left may be right, even though it's not yours, and you have just seen it.
It could be, yes. Again, I haven't seen it before, but it could be.
okay. Other questions, issues? Anybody else?
You know, I realize this may not be, this is not a technology question, but there is this notion about competitiveness. One of, that the operators have brought up, that a date certain of a protocol, like the one we have currently in regulations, will diminish their ability to be competitive given the, whether they would be required to go, you know, all with one protocol, et cetera. Given your knowledge perhaps of the industry as a trade organization, could you comment on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I sort of said at the outset of my comments too. I think they do have a legitimate concern there. Because at this point, in the last survey that was done by GSA worldwide, not just in the US suppliers, but worldwide suppliers, 70% of based on ship shares, the manufacturers of 70% of the ship share, that's the total machines going into the market, have currently adopted G2S. So at this point today, or actually when they did the survey at the beginning of last year, there are still 30% of the manufacturers who don't do that. A lot of those are like in South America, you know, some of the European manufacturers, Asian manufacturers, and things like that, but there still are. So the fact that some of those manufacturers haven't adopted G2S yet or implemented in their machines could end up limiting the selection of machines for the operators. The other problem that you have, and I call it the 57 Chevy problem, that there are older machines that are still very popular with players, and the operators might want to bring some of those 10-year-old machines into their operations. Frankly, it's impossible to put G2S on those machines. You're going to have to use some sort of converter board to convert the SAS into, you know, what's needed for the network. So on those two ends of the scale, you know, so the holdouts who haven't gone to G2S yet, and the older machines that don't have G2S and probably can't support it, are where their concerns would lie. And be able to, so they, you know, I think they want to be able to bring those products into their properties and not be restricted.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Matt, and I want to make sure that I understand correctly, is if I've got it right, GTEC has experience with a hybrid system which has G2S and SAS equipment in it. You also have all G2S systems, and you have all SMS systems. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So the all G2S systems, those were all the ones you were talking about in Canada and Europe?
Yes,
Those are all G2S.
yes.
Is the U.S. behind other countries in adoption of G2S machines? Utilization of G2S machines?
Do I have to answer that question?
Yes.
It all comes down to business. And, you know, the market for new machine sales in the U.S. has not been that robust the last few years because of the economy and the saturation in the market. And to get new products with new technology in them, there have to be new machine sales. And so, in fact, in other areas of the world where the business climate has been different, they've been able to adopt G2S faster in many areas than they have been in the U.S. Canada is very notable. I mean, because they're, you know, well, you would probably know the exact counts up in Canada, but, you know, vast majority of the machines now in Canada have all gone to G2S and are all new machines up there. That sort of turnover in inventories has not happened as quickly in the U.S. as it has in Canada or in other parts of the world.
Yeah, it was startling that a year ago, the ship share was 70% G2S. Just from having heard the operators before, I would have just guessed it was way, way, way lower than that.
Yeah, well, the ship share was based, well, I'm not sure if it's 70% of the machines going into the market, but 70%, the manufacturers who control 70% of the market have adopted G2S and is putting into
Yeah.
their products. They might be selling older products that
Right.
don't have it, newer
Okay.
products that do.
Right.
Do have it. And the other statistic that they got during the survey, that there are currently 192,000 machines that support G2S worldwide. So it's not, a handful of them here and there. There's a large number. And the other statistic is there are actually over 1,000 systems in use worldwide that are also communicating with
What's the
G2S.
total number of machines?
With G2S,
No,
192,000.
Yeah, but what's, of what universe? What's the total number of machines?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, worldwide, how many machines are out there?
I mean, is it
There are a lot.
is that 10%, 50%, 1%?
I think
Don't know, all right,
I don't know offhand.
okay,
I mean, there are a lot of gaming machines out there.
right. Okay, anybody else? Director Day?
I just have just a couple of summary comments, just as you're pondering where to go from here. From my perspective, one thing that I found as I has been listening to the discussion is that my earlier days came back and actually where I was down on my knees pulling out a microchip from a machine attempting to do a field test. And I only would acknowledge it now, but when I closed the machine back up, it didn't work. But I think what really, in the end, that reflects to me is it's better now, but I mean, what we're looking at here is a concept that actually can bring us to be the best regulatory solution on tracking of assets, software, and effectiveness of the machine regulatory approach. I also would recommend as the commission, as we move forward, that the commission not try, we've had a lot of discussion about it, and maybe this comes from me reviewing all the activities and what we have to get done before we actually get our system ready for the slot parter, that the commission not try to do any kind of a two-pronged development in this area, that we just actually look at if we want to go with a CMS, if that's the commission's ultimate decision, that we do that and we implement with Penn as we open up the establishments. Part of that comes from at least my knowledge that it's been very difficult once you get going in full operations and people are up running. Some personal experience that it is difficult to actually change from a CMS or from a manual system to a CMS system once everybody gets in that operation mode. I also had, as we were developing this along the way, I had the opportunity to run into a professional peer and talk to him a little bit about it. And he made comments to me that it's really a source of confidence. And as he goes up to the legislature to testify about revenue and splits and taxes and has the information that comes actually directly to his state system, and he can reproduce that. And the level of confidence he has in that kind of information and its availability, I also thought was significant.
Who was that?
Steve Martino, Maryland. The other thing is that strikes me in this whole process. We've had a huge technical discussion, and we've talked about G2S and whether it's stable and all this kind of stuff. But one thing we ended up, I think, not focusing on is the concern or the issue about transparency and availability of information. And I say this respectfully, but as a regulator, as we pursue, and we've seen this as of late with a couple of our licensees, when we pursue information and request information, we're really at the mercy of the industry's responsiveness to those requests. And they have other priorities in many cases, but we're there to try to regulate. The CMS does offer us that opportunity that we have our information, we have it when we need it, we are confident in the level that it's there, and it also allows us to look at the actual deterrent effect, even in all our cost analysis. Our staff has generated great cost analysis. I know there's disagreement and assumptions. I know MGM doesn't necessarily hold that same opinion about the result, but one thing we can't identify in that kind of cost analysis is the value of deterrence. And
I'm sorry, the value
of deterrence, and that
Deterrence.
deterrence, that people know, that industry knows that we're watching, and we're watching every day, and we're watching on our own system. So from my perspective, this system does give Massachusetts the opportunity to put forward a regulatory piece that it's very effective, very efficient, and allows us to take advantage of our staff and in the right places at the right time. So with that, as I listened to it, I thought, well, just for, actually, the commission may go a different direction, but I thought it might be worthwhile to say, I think in the end, we've talked a little bit about this from staff, but the recommendation, I think, from staff on this end is that the commission, in order to move this forward or not, that the commission select GTEC and authorize us to begin contract negotiations subject to IAB's recommendations that we heard and a successful background investigation, and return to the commission for final approval of a contract. And what I think we've heard here is our discussion, but I would also suggest that if the commission thought this is the way to go, that you also direct staff to bring an amendment to the slot standards to provide flexibility to the GS2 standard. Bring that back to the commission for discussion and consideration for possible amendment. From there,
It's our turn.
appreciate your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to start off?
Yeah, I'll start. Interesting conversation, lots of different perspectives. My initial concerns with regard to this were certainly cost and our uncertainty, also the ability to explore another option. And I have, in speaking to our people and having meetings, I am convinced that we have the ability to explore another option while we entertain this, entertain this option as well. So I was not convinced that was the case before, but I do have a better feeling about that now. Which would mean, though, that which I think would be an important piece here, if in fact we do approve this, is during those negotiations we do explore an out clause, because there's no sense exploring something else that comes to, that really has the ability to do something else while we're tied up for 10 years. So those things give me a little more comfort in moving forward in this direction, frankly. And, certainly listening to this morning's discussion, there are issues, but I think a lot of them have been addressed here. And it's not perfect, but yet, the G2S isn't perfect, and we heard that from MGM. I think it's, MGM is willing to move forward with that pain of exploring this system, but is in many ways asking us not to move forward with a system, and so technology is important, and learning more about the manual system, and I've seen it over the years, and I saw it again firsthand. I don't think that is the way for us to move forward in a permanent way, is a manual system. And again, I think we could have done it, for a year or so, but I came to think that and be assured that we can explore other options, but yet still be in a position where we can move forward here. But one of the things that would be important to me is the exploration of some kind of an out clause.
Anybody else?
I said last time that I gave the reasons why I was in favor of this, but I wanted the conversation that did occur this week to proceed. It proceeded with good and new information. I am in favor of Director Day's recommendation, but I would strengthen the second part of that recommendation to say that staff should be instructed to come back with an amendment that took out the requirement of G2S by January 1, 17, or convince us that that, for some reason, shouldn't happen. That's what I'm predisposed to. I think that there is there are two separate conversations going on here, and they can and should be split as we move forward. I would also recommend that the contract negotiations include both an out clause, as my colleague Commissioner Cameron talked about, but also a warranty that the system, once installed, the CMS system once installed, will not degrade the operation of a G2S system, an SMS system, or a hybrid floor.
I would concur with all those points. One of my biggest concerns in looking at this was, and I shared this concern with our CFO, is the scalability of the project and the upfront costs. I know we really can't have that scalability discussion until we decide to direct staff to enter into a contract discussion with GTEC. So for that reason, I'm also supportive of Director Day's recommendation.
Yes, same here, but I would ask, and I would add and ask that those contract negotiations look at alternatives for structuring the payments on par with some of the machines that come at different times. Because, and I understand that these would have to be modeled financially, et cetera. But the assumption that we made at the RFR was a solid one for uniformity. But the reality, in my view, is that we have the certainty of 1,250 machines in the very near future, and we are less certain about the next and the next. And not just on the technology perspective, like it's been discussed here, relative with the protocol or with the requirements about the protocol, but also about its very own existence, if you will, and the number of machines may change, etc. So I would ask that as you conduct those negotiations, you explore alternatives for different pricing that would accommodate for these out clause that we've been thinking about, or certainly a different stream of payments that would be more reflective of just that scalability that we've talked about in the past.
And I just put, as introductory remarks, I think I owe Commissioner McHugh and my colleagues an apology for 2 weeks ago expressing my frustration for the 2-week delay. Number one, I probably shouldn't have expressed my frustration, but more importantly, I was flat wrong that there was no more to be learned and that positions weren't going to change. And I was flat wrong on both scores. And I think it's a credit to my colleagues that with all the intensity of these discussions, and there have been a lot of intense discussions, that we have learned and we have changed our minds. And so my apologies to all of you. Secondly, I take the reluctance of the operators at face value. We've had a lot of negotiations with our operators here on a lot of things. And I've come to believe that, they're going to clearly argue for their business interests. That's totally fine, and so on and so forth. We're going to have our differences of opinion. But I respect the integrity of their opinions. And that means something. When the three of them come up here, and even though I think we've done a very good job of dealing with a lot of the facts, their concerns have inherent merit as well as specific merit, which affects my agreeing with everybody else that I think it is the right thing to do. There is a question about doing it in a prudent way. The debates that we've had have caused there to come up a number of really good ideas about scaled payments and out clauses and so forth. There are some good faith risks down the road. There are some unknowns, and we deserve, if GTEC wants to do this business, it would be good if they will share some of that risk with us. Having said all that, I agree with the gist if somebody wants to put it into the shape of a motion.
I just have one other question, and it regards some of the issues that Director Wells brought up should any contract discussions include the protocols with respect to the potential conflict of interest or the safeguards that we might look to Pennsylvania's model for, should that be included in the contract discussions, or do you see that as a separate item?
It was basically my intention that as we move forward with any successful contract negotiation, that it include the IAB conditions.
Okay.
Somebody want to put that in the form of a motion?
Yes, well, I move that the staff be authorized to commence contract negotiations with GTEC for a CMS system that includes the safeguards recommended by the IEB, that includes an out clause, that includes consideration of a payment schedule reflective of when machines will come online, that includes a warranty sufficient to protect the commission from introduction of a CMS system in a SAS environment, a G2S environment, or a hybrid environment, and that the staff be requested to return to the commission with a recommendation for an amended regulation that deletes, changes, or in some other way postpones the requirement for an all G2S environment by January 1, 2017.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Could I ask just a
Sure.
administrative question? Is it any contract would be subject to the background being successful as well?
Yes.
And did the commission still wish the staff to come back with that negotiated contract for your approval?
Yes. So I would add that the staff return after the negotiations are completed with the completed contract for the commission's approval, and that the contract not be awarded until and unless there's a satisfactory completion of the background investigation of GTEC.
Thank you.
So that's the complete package.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. I never would have believed it. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank
all
you,
of your
everybody.
continued
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
participation. We're now on item 5C, Director Day.
Chairman Crosby, what I'd like to do, and this is actually the first stage of a series of recommendations that your directors and I are coming forward to the commission with. To start that process
Can you
today.
pull the mic up a little bit?
Excuse me. To start that process today, Director Wells is here because actually part of the reason is a number of the lines that I've got on this little chart are IAB lines anyway. So I think it's she just will be here to help me answer these questions. But what I want to do is just in your packet you do have our planning chart, and I'm just going to run through this and kind of give you a glimpse of what your staff has in mind as we move forward, and a little bit about what the deadlines we're looking at. I will move right along down through the document. When I come back, I'll also try to emphasize those things that I think are actually are very critical to this, the slot power actually being able to open on time. So I want to start at an unusual place at the top of the diagram. And what I want to just mention is, of course, we have our oversight project management, and I think you heard Jennifer Pink a little bit this morning, but there are some areas in particular that we need to depend on that crew to bring forward with us in cooperation with Penn. Some of those are any change in schedule that may come forward if the commission, in fact, is going to look at the final site and design for the floor plan, terms of the project that are possibly in surrounding community agreements and those kind of things, and then any license conditions that apply. So we have a separate process that we'll be undergoing, and we're going to start strengthening that process probably with a separate weekly meeting as we get closer to the opening of the slot parlor itself, so we don't lose track of any of those. As you drop down the next line, which is probably, in the end, a lot of this is the pre-opening and test play of the establishment. We're now looking at that right around May 1st through May 31st. That will be IAB that completes that process in support with our gaming laboratory as we select that. Going down a little bit further, you'll probably notice there's some other key elements. Training, of course. The IAB and the state police have to select the troopers that will staff the Plain Ridge facility. And at the same time, we also have to and have opened our advertising for gambling agents that will also be stationed at the facility. Commission does have the requirement of 24-hour coverage, and both those groups, along with our financial investigators, need to be appropriately trained. As you move down a little further, our licensing unit has some critical operations, but probably two of the most critical are being able to handle the influx of applications that come, particularly on the employee side as those become larger. And we anticipate that, at least in our discussions with Penn, that we're probably talking about 4-1 being a very large dividing point. Probably about half of the 500 anticipated will have come in at that point. The other side of that, of course, is our ability to go forward with our out-facing application system, which we're anticipating at this point about February 15th. Responsible gaming is also moving forward. You have already passed some time ago now their self-exclusion regulations, and they have to move forward with actually getting that ready now to put in place in some fashion, maybe even a temporary fashion for tracking those with self-exclusion as Penn begins to open. Then, of course, is the development of the play management process, which has its own flexibility or its own complexities, and we are looking at hopefully being able to make sure that its system is ready to go by May 30th, which would incorporate the concept that we would be able to begin with that program as Penn opened. I think we all know that is a challenge in and of itself, but at least at this point, that's part of what we're planning. In addition with that, Mark and his team have to move forward with the GameSense area right on site. And of course, along with that, they've got to prepare the materials. They've got to prepare a marketing program to move it forward. They've already selected the council to provide staff for that facility itself. Of course, we are looking for our workforce and supplier diversity program, and Jill, to go forward with the announcement of a draft plan about MWVBE lending plan, and Commissioner Stebbins as well, and hopefully we'll be able to get that in the early winter or the late winter of this year. In addition, to move forward with the building capacity program in order to help with the vendor capacity in that area. One of the more critical processes is really is our technology unit. We need to be able to certify our labs, which we are planning to do that hopefully here by early March sometime. And as the same process, we've got to come forward with an agreement so that a private lab can provide us testing services as we get to the pre-opening area. So, and it failed. There's kind of another part there. There's basically the certification of the labs, the selection of labs for testing, which is usually done by the manufacturers, and then the actual on-site regulatory testing of the equipment before they can pre-open, which will be done by a lab as well.
Rick, where is that represented, the actual regulatory testing?
Yeah, if right at the bottom of the chart, Commissioner Zuniga, and so we pulled it out and it makes it pretty small, is the lab certification process. Basically been going on now, and we hope to have it done by 3/31, I think, the blue line, and then the lab testing. up to 4:30, and the lab procurement.
So we'll begin the lab procurement for the regulatory testing in March, according to this, or could we start that earlier?
We hope to be able to get the lab procurement by April 15th. And the lab certification by the 31st. We can
When-
work on these
Yes,
processes
yes,
at the
it's
same
good.
time, but,
They don't have to be tied, in other words.
yeah. Yeah, the thing we do need is the certification,
Yeah,
and then from those certified labs, we're going to pick a lab that will help us do the testing.
Yeah.
Lab or labs.
fair enough.
And then general administration, and actually it brought a little clarity to us as we go back, take a look at this. Again, we were anticipating the design and testing of the CMS system. Now that we're there, we can actually fine tune that a little bit more. And we'll have to do that with part of the negotiation with GTEC anyway, is exactly how fast the system will come online. Real quick, let me hit the regulations just to let you know we've got those in view. We talked a little bit about the hearing this morning. The hearing we started with actually hit on some of the regulation areas that we are moving forward within our key to the process. We talked about the credit, ATM, and debit cards. That's moving forward and should be in place by about mid-February. We've also got the play management regulations with the first draft, which the commission is going to look at, or has on board to look at today. If I ever get through this process, they'll be glad to get up. And the concept there is to actually take a look at this proposed regulation and see if that is the direction the commission wants to go, and then we can actually move further down that road. Internal controls, the bulk of internal controls were approved by the commission some time ago, and we're at hearing again today. So with those, Penn is able to move forward with most of its submissions, the great majority of the submissions. And we're also on schedule to have the remaining internal controls dealing with financial reporting, tax reporting on the 5th of, well, actually at the next commission meeting. We've already dealt with transfer, which isn't real critical to this slot parlor spot, but the licensee reporting, if you'll see as we move down that, the commission has already passed that and put it in place for emergency regulation. The two areas further down are two areas that we have to do more work, and we need to move fairly rapidly on those. One is the complementary services area, which most all of our licensees will have in some format. We need to make sure that we have the limitations and the descriptions of that in our regulations. Pre-opening and test play is another area that we need to move forward, but we obviously need to have that finalized in time for us to complete the pre-opening inspection on site. And the exclusion list, which is those individuals for, in many cases, criminal purposes that are actually, in effect, banned from actually coming in on this on the location. It's different from self-exclusion. In our hearing process and enforcement and civil penalties, we of course need to have that done by the time they get open. So we've got still a little bit of time. Overall, the critical areas that we need to keep a real close eye on, because without them, it will be hard to move forward in June. That's the lab, the certification, the lab testing, and the RFR, not RFR, we don't have to do RFR, the procurement of the lab that's going to do the actual on-site testing. That's probably one of the most critical ones. The other is our oversight project management, to make sure that we've got the conditions and like the traffic studies and those things taken care of and online. And along with the lab, one of the major critical area is the pre-opening inspection and test play. That's going to be absolutely necessary as we move forward to getting to the date when they open. Another critical area will be the surveillance, security plan, and internal controls, which we all hit on, as I discussed earlier. I'm just kind of repeating these. Of course, our gaming agents and MSP selection, hiring, and training. It's not, if we don't have anybody to put in there, that creates us a little bit of a problem. And we're in a situation, obviously, how well we can license, particularly vendors and employees, is going to be critical to making sure that we get Penn open on time.
Which means the LMS has to be working.
Yeah. Well, if the LMS doesn't work, we're going to have been, and we'll continue to do it in some other fashion manually if we have to. But yeah, we want to have it work, and that'll be the most efficient way, and I think effective, because it will really allow people to apply on site with the help of their human resources office. So it'll do it better. If something happens and it doesn't, then we may be doing a lot of paper traveling and tracking until such time as we can't do anything else to make sure we get it done. I have to admit that little bump isn't particularly on my chart, but I'm anticipating it won't have to be.
Director Wells, what keeps you up at night?
Could I have?
Very soundly, sir.
Oh, all right.
I had one question about the play management test project and evaluation. I thought that we had discussed with Penn National and through a consensus, certainly not a formal vote, that we would not necessarily deploy that until everyone was satisfied that the machines were otherwise stable.
And I agree, that's my recollection too, and I think this is just an optimistic belief that can be done before they open.
Okay.
Not necessarily
That doesn't change the one-step, two-step process for that.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's not a critical path item.
No.
If it's not ready,
Right.
it keeps the casino still
Right.
open. So.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
I think that's it for that item.
Commissioner? Oh,
Director Day, you mentioned internal controls, the hearing we had this morning. What is the next step there?
Actually, they need to be formally adopted by the commission. There's any changes that come in that legal
So we'll wait for
incorporates.
the Attorney General's comments before we move that process along, right? We were told today that we'd be getting written,
She's sending a letter.
Later this-
written,
We're supposed to get comments either today or tomorrow. We are in a process now where we'll be bringing those back to you within 2 weeks to look at what's final, and then we'll file. So we're already in the very formal process with the hearing today. As soon as we get their comments, we'll review them, we'll make changes, but they will come back to you at the next commission meeting so we can keep moving them forward.
okay. Just
Thanks,
wanted to
Kathy.
make sure we were waiting for those comments to come in.
Another element, and I thought this was your question, but another element of the internal controls, I heard today from Penn that they are ready to submit the internal controls plan to Executive Director Day in the next few days, just like they're required to do for the review of the actual plan and the actual document. So that's also in the critical path, so to speak, and I'm pleased to hear that they're also progressing along.
Commissioners, and again, we've also made it clear to them that they needn't wait to move it all forward. They're
That's
more
right.
than welcome to move each section, and Bruce Mann is working with them individually to
Right.
make sure that can happen.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes my administrative report today.
All right.
Thank
We are moving on. Actually, we're only 10 minutes late. We are moving on to Director Griffin, and her first item is the MGM Diversity Report. Director Griffin.
Good afternoon, Chairman Crosby and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
We are joined by representatives from MGM who are here today to present their diversity and affirmative marketing program. And why don't I let Mike Mathis introduce his team?
Good afternoon again.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Before I introduce the team and kick off on this topic, I just wanted to make one comment, if I may, about the prior item on the CMS. While we're disappointed with the decision, I wanted to express our gratitude for the many protections that you laid into the conditions that felt reflective of our concerns. I think that speaks to the relationship that we have with this commission, and I appreciate your comments about taking our concerns to heart. So sincerely, thank you. Thank you for those protections. Moving on to a new topic, and one that we're very excited to talk about, is I think we're at the point where we're going to present our diversity and affirmative action marketing program. It is a condition of our license. We've had and I say we, but really it's been our team, who I'll introduce in a moment, have had a series of very good conversations and discussions with Director Griffin, and we think it's resulted in a very good program, and potentially we'd ask for you to vote on it at the conclusion if that's appropriate. But in advance of that, let me introduce our team. To my far left, let me get my, who's at my far left?
That would be me, Jerry Harris.
To my far left, Jerry Harris. I went all the way down the table, sorry. Executive Director of Diversity and Contracts. To her right is Mary Kate Murrin, who is our new Director of Workforce Development and Planning. And then to my left is Jed Nolzo, who is our outside attorney who you've worked with in the past. So they will carry the lion's share of the presentation. Sorry about that, Jerry. And we'll conclude with an update about where we're at with our first hires, which is particularly exciting for me as the president of the project. So with that, Jerry, if you kick it off.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is my first time before you. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to meet each of you and to present this information with my team on behalf of our company. So what we're going to talk about is we have a short deck that will give you some of our background as our president said, and then we will entertain any questions, of course, that you have of us. So with that said, next slide, please. Many of you know some of the history of MGM Resorts in this gaming and hospitality market, and I want to speak specifically about our diversity and inclusion commitments. So it is really a true commitment from the top of our organization as all the way through our board of directors. And it permeates throughout our company in regards to our company culture, all of our business operations, and our business systems. And in 2000, MGM was the first gaming and hospitality company in this industry to voluntarily adopt a diversity and inclusion business imperative. So this again speaks to our commitment in this space. To give you an example of how we are a pioneer in the gaming industry, we have countless awards that have been put upon us across the years since the inception of our program. And I'm just going to touch on a few. In 2012, we received 25 noteworthy companies for diversity from Diversity Inc. magazine, 40 best companies for diversity from Black Enterprise, and top 50 employers list for Equal Opportunity magazine. Over the years, we've received a similar award from those magazines or those agencies, and including 2013, we ranked #1 in Diversity Inc. for top regional companies. Women Business Prize, Enterprise Council, we were awarded one of the America's top corporations for women businesses, and top 50 companies for diversity and inclusion from Uptown Professional Magazine. And again, countless awards. I just pulled those out as an example of some that relate specifically to what our objectives here are in regards to MWBE participation and employment. Next slide, please. So now what I'd like to do is talk about, again, how our program, our corporate program, has afforded us some of these awards and acknowledgments. Since 2000, we have had a program that has recognized minority business enterprises, women business enterprises, and as the program continued to evolve, DBEs were added to that, as well as veterans and persons with disabilities, and now LGBT as well. So all of those classifications are recognized under our corporate program and are counted in all of our spend across the company. Next slide, please. So as a result of us capturing data against all of these classifications, since the inception of the program, we have had more than 1,000 certified diverse-owned businesses and suppliers and contractors engaged. We've also spent more than $3 billion in the company's expenditures in these various classifications. And this is captured through various methodologies, both automated and manual, through our developments, as we're doing now here, through our capital improvements, which I'm also involved in for all of our existing properties, and then from the operations side of all of our properties.
Over what period of time is that?
Since 2000.
Since 2000?
Uh-huh. And I think that this data actually cut off a year ago. So it still is not the most recent data
Right.
that we could offer
Right.
you.
Right, thank you.
Uh-huh. Next slide. So in doing this, what has this actually resulted in? And I'm just going to share 2 case studies with you. The MGM Grand Detroit project, which was completed between 2005 and 2007, similar in value in that it was an investment of $803 million for the company. We had 76 MBEs awarded $172 million in contracts, and 11 WBEs awarded over $24 million in contracts. And again, that was at the MGM Grand Detroit. And then the City Center contract, City Center project that was completed in Las Vegas, that opened in 2009, was the largest construction project by a private industry in the U.S. history, as far as we know.
Wow.
And that project was over $8.5 billion. And we had over 200 MWDBE enterprises engaged on that project, and over $700 million awarded to those MWDBEs.
Jerry, are you aware of, on the Detroit project, because of collaboration with the city of Detroit, whether some of these were requirements placed upon you because of the introduction of gaming in Detroit?
They were, yes. And I was not involved on the project at that time on behalf of the company, but I can say yes, that is affirmative.
I would also, maybe you have this data to us later, but I'd be interested in your workforce, particularly during construction on a city like Detroit, and how those figures panned out
Okay, I can go back and see if that data was collected.
Okay.
And if we have that, we'll be happy to share that. Okay. Next slide, please. So that talked about 2 examples of our accomplishments and what we've done in terms of monitoring diversity and inclusion on 2 of our developments. So now I want to touch on some of the tools of success that was involved in all of those projects that I just named. What we do is we ask for the contractors and designers to consider joint ventures, partnerships, and mentoring programs, because we know that in some cases, smaller businesses do not have the capacity to take on some of the contracts that are of the size that are going to be required for us to meet all of the needs to build these developments. The company has always had dedicated personnel from the corporate level on down to the project level. Dedicated staff such as diversity compliance managers and officers, and within the past few years, I have been asked to step up as well to make sure that we have oversight in this area for all of our regional developments. The program requires that the companies involved have a commitment starting at the bid phase in terms of us understanding what their thought and plan is in terms of meeting the objectives or the goals that we have on the projects. We validate all of the diverse certifications of the vendors that they are considering and require them to keep and monitor validation of those certs over the course of the project. The diversity program is a contractual obligation. Mike mentioned that I am over diversity in contracts. So for the company, I am also head of the contracts department responsible for all of our CapEx contracts. And this is one component of our contractual obligations to all of our companies that we engage. And we have this as well through all of our operations, which I'm not involved in, but I know that it's part of the purchase order and global procurement process as well.
Jerry, if I can, let me redeem myself from earlier and talk about the fantastic services that Jerry does perform for us. We've been tracking these statistics since 2000, as Jerry mentioned. It was in 2000 that the board of directors formed a corporate level committee, the Corporate and Social Responsibility Committee. Jim Murrin is chair of that committee, and former Secretary Alexis Herman, who is Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, is the co-chair of that committee. And it is for that reason that we've been able to collect that data, and we focused on it, and we were the first in the industry. And I think some of this you've seen in our RFA 2 documents in terms of our commitment to this area. But I think what it speaks to is Jerry's got a dedicated position that is focused on diversity in the context of the contracts we let out. So this is not a position that we hired to comply with the needs of this program, but this is an existing program. And in fact, she was nice enough to travel late at night from Maryland, where she's also monitoring and implementing this program. So with this program, we bring a great deal of institutional expertise, because we've been doing it for 15 years now.
Thank you, Mike. And before I came up here, I was trying to think about how long I've been doing this, and I actually, it shocked me that the first time in my brain I said it's almost 30 years, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize I was that old. So
It gets worse, Jerry.
So that institutional knowledge is exactly what it is that we bring, and I am very pleased to be able to be a part of this team and this company to bring what I have to the table. So as I continue here, our model for the corporate program currently tracks participation at Tier 1, direct engagements with MGM, any direct contracts with us. Tier 2, that would be subcontractors, and then Tier 3 would come down to the vendor or supplier level. In our corporate program, we also have a hierarchy that we work through if, in fact, the vendor has multiple certifications. Say if I have both MBE, WBE, and veteran-owned business. In our corporate program, this is the hierarchy through which we would then say we would take my MBE classification first. If, in fact, we wanted to consider my other classifications, then we'd go to the WBE and then ultimately the VBE certification. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get through the program, because I know that's of concern here. Then the program has pretty heavy enforcement in terms of the tracking and the monitoring. Again, reporting begins at the bid phase and is validated at the contract engagement with documentation that we put in the contract so that we know who's who, no opportunity for bait and switch. And then we have monthly reporting with the billing process, but then weekly reporting at other levels to support that monthly reporting. And then we have our continuous review process. Mike mentioned that this obligation within our corporation is reported all the way up to our board committee. I have had to sit before that board and have my feet held to the fire. We also have our own internal auditing processes that are regularly applied to all of our projects to make sure that we stay on track. Another tool of success is, in fact, the leveraging, and I didn't put this bullet on here, but how we leverage our community partners to make sure that we can achieve all of these objectives. So now, that's just a little bit about what we do at the corporate level. So, but I know we're here to talk about Springfield and MGM Springfield plan. So let's talk about that now.
Jerry's going to maybe see if Jill wanted to jump in and talk a little bit.
Yep, before we
process.
dig into the plan, maybe I should outline the process that we went through in terms of receiving public comment and that sort of thing. Later, I'm willing to outline the strengths and areas of concerns that I have regarding the plan. So you all are aware that these plans fulfill some licensing requirements or licensing conditions. And what MGM has submitted to us today fulfill not only the 2 requirements during design and construction, but also they've included some operational diversity planning. However, there is one, so that operational information is much earlier than is required. And there's one other plan that is not yet submitted, that isn't due until the spring of 2015. And that's a plan to be submitted and worked on in conjunction with the Department of Labor and Workforce Development and the Career Centers. So they're working on that, and we've made some outreach to the new Undersecretary of Labor to get that initial meeting going. So included in your materials today is a red line version of the diversity and affirmative marketing plan. And that red line version illustrates the changes that MGM has made to the original submission of the plan to the commission as a result of comments made by commission staff and also comments from the public that we have solicited. So we received feedback from the Mass Gaming Commission Vendor Advisory Team, the community colleges, the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, and the Policy Group on Tradeswomen's Issues. So you have all 8 written comments from those groups are in your packets as well. Additionally, there's a separate chart entitled Blue Tarp Redevelopment Response to Diversity Program Comments. And so MGM looked at each comment and provided responses and also indicated if there were any changes to the plan as a result of those comments. I think I have some comments regarding the plan. I'm going to actually wait until you present and go over. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Director Griffin. This process, MGM is sincerely appreciative of because it gave us additional insight, and anytime we are challenged to give an account of what it is that we say we stand on, we appreciate the opportunity. So as Director Griffin said, the item in your packet that outlines our response to each and every question that we've received thus far, we went through it several times, and you will see that we've made adjustments, and we'll consider any of the other concerns that you may have, okay, as we continue to go. So if we can go back to our the additional few slides we have here before we jump into any questions you have on the plan. This slide talks about the MGM Springfield plan itself. And I'd like to say that at the onset here that based on our conversations as late as yesterday, we have made adjustments, and we are committing to applying the vendor goals that we show here and the percentages to both dollars spent on design and on construction. And we are committing to, in fact, tracking and including design expenditures in a supplemental report that will give you all of the information regarding what has happened from the design side in an independent document so that we can address your concerns. With that said, the diversity goals that we have set forth in our plan are as follows. The certified business entities, MBEs, 5%, WBE, 10%, and veteran-owned businesses, 2 to 4%. And then at the workforce level, for covered employees, which is also defined in the plan through various minority statuses, would be women at 6.9, minorities at 15.3, and veterans at 8%. The plan for construction also encourages and will address apprenticeship programs, and we, similarly as to what we do at the corporate level, we will have a very strong solicitation that is supported by our community partners, and we have various tactics that we use to ensure that we do very strong outreach and solicitation. Then the tracking and reporting and monitoring will be very similar to what we do at the corporate level. And of course, in this instance, we will also work very closely with Pink to understand any other reporting or monitoring concerns that will need to be addressed.
Jerry, quick question.
Yes.
You guys haven't selected a construction manager or GC yet. How do you engage them into this part of the plan?
We inform them of the obligations and the expectations from the onset of conversations with them.
Okay.
And then it again is a contractual obligation when we do engage them.
And just a quick question on apprenticeships. Obviously, apprenticeships in construction, I'm assuming you're referring to
Union apprenticeships.
union apprenticeships.
Uh-huh.
Do you make, is your experience been to make somewhat of an adjustment to pay, based on what the available construction labor workforce is? Or how do you come up with kind of setting a target for the percentage of apprenticeships on the project?
We have not set a specific target or number here,
Okay.
from my understanding thus far. However, we do seek to maximize or to have as many apprentices as we can and to encourage workers to and residents to seek apprenticeship programs, because we know that that will then give them a higher quality of life as they continue to go through the process and seek other job opportunities.
I mean, it goes without saying, you, Mike and his team, your team, have been on the ground in Springfield and Western Mass for a while.
Yeah.
There's obviously not as large a construction workforce for a project like this as there would be, say, based in Eastern Massachusetts. So I just want to make sure that you're sensitive to that reflection and the opportunity, as you just pointed out, of increase the number of apprenticeships. You have a chance to fold more people into the construction trades out in that part of the state.
Yeah, Commissioner, I'll tell you, we are committed to developing a robust apprenticeship program because there's two elements in Springfield. There is the issue of making sure that they're local. We can always pull from Eastern Mass because that's where all the activity is. But you know, that would be the lazy way to do it, frankly. And
That wouldn't go over well.
that would not go over well. So we're focused on making sure that we are able to develop local talent, and we've been in discussions with the local trade unions about that generally, and then now that we're getting closer to identifying a construction manager, GC, I think that's the key relationship. They'll set the requirements, and then the unions are the pipeline.
Good.
And then secondly, particularly in the diverse communities, getting those folks into the right trades, and some are easier than others. Some of the higher skilled trades are going to take a little bit more lead time on the apprenticeship program, and we're aware of that. So we'll continue to update you on those efforts, but we're very focused on making sure that happens.
Okay, great.
For the most part, that concludes the comments that I wanted to make in regards to the design and construction aspect of our program, other than to say that we are committed to keeping our commitments to Springfield and the surrounding communities. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mary Kate to talk about the operations aspect of the program.
Great, thank you, Jerry. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to give you the plan highlights from an operations standpoint. As Director Griffin mentioned, we will be having a formalized plan for you in the springtime, but wanted to really kind of give you a status update from the last time we were here in October, where we laid out our partnership with SkillSmart, laid out our mass hiring timeline, and just wanted to give you some concrete strategies moving forward. The covered labor force, as you recall, the goals are women at 50%, minorities at 50%, and veterans at 4%. It's important to note here that as part of the HCA, it was only 2% from veterans. And after numerous conversations with the veteran organizations in Springfield and the surrounding area, we upped that number to 4% based on their feedback. We see that their participation is crucial in a healthy and vibrant workforce in Springfield and Western Mass, and we appreciate their feedback during that process. And then, of course, Springfield residents is at 35%. As we talk, bless you, as we talk about strategy development and alignment, we're really not talking about a straight hiring process here or model. What we're talking about is a workforce development model, and that is a different case. And it's really a testament to MGM Springfield and MGM Resorts International's commitment to revitalizing Springfield and the Western Mass area. We are going to have to be integrating our community partners, our colleges, our four-year and community partners to ensure that the education training programs are there to really build that capacity from a local perspective. As our goal states, we have 35% from the local area. We have to make sure that our training and education programs are in place and are built to capacity. And we are working diligently with our partners in the last few weeks, and we'll continue to work till when we have to present that plan to the commission. From a community outreach and partnership development, we have memos of understanding and letter of intent that were formed. Commissioner Stebbins, as you said, we've been on the ground for years. We're very engaged in transitioning those from MOUs, LOIs, into hard agreements. We're starting the process to do audits of our community partners and our education sessions, just to make sure they can meet some of the core competencies. We like to kind of enculture MGM Springfield culture within those to ensure that we have a good foundation, and also to ensure that the population in Springfield is ready for jobs that they are not MGM Springfield. And finally, from an internship and training programs, we continue to work with two of our great partners of Holyoke Community College and Springfield Technical College in their aid and support of building capacity. It's really important that we build those internships and also the training programs from a job readiness program to create a successful pathway to keep our knowledge within Springfield and also in Western Mass. There's a wonderful knowledge base that really goes from Hartford, Connecticut, all the way up to Northampton. We want to keep that knowledge and education base in our area, obviously with our program with MGM Springfield, and just increase that across Springfield and Western Mass in general. Thank you.
Could I ask you a question about that first bullet, the diversity goals?
Yes, sir.
It's women 50%, minority 50%, and veterans 4%.
Yes, sir.
That's 104%.
That's true. We do see that there is a cross-section of demographics of a person might be within one category and also representative of another, sir. So we are going to be tracking that for the commission, but also, as Mike said, through our CSR program internally. Those are things that we do track from a corporate perspective.
Yeah, if I can, I want to talk about this potential double count type issue, which is, you saw in an earlier slide, we talked about the priority of certifications that we look at. That goes to the total contract amount. Because when it comes to the total contract amount, I think we want to ensure that there is no double counting, and that's, I need to come up with a better phrase than that, but that's what we're using for this phenomena. So there we do a weighting system, and that way we ensure that we get to a total MWDBE, VBE number. In this particular instance, because of separate commitments we've made in separate categories, I think the double counting is inevitable. There's going to be a third of our employees are going to be Springfield residents, and they naturally are going to fall into other demographics that we're going to be taking credit for and reporting. So for that reason, there is the potential to go over 100%, but certainly the intent is there to make sure that we achieve the maximum amount of participation in each of those categories.
But there's no room for non-minority, non-women.
No, there is.
No, there is. There is. Yeah.
Any one of those 50 women could be minorities.
Or it could be
at the same
Caucasian.
time.
Or it could be Caucasian.
Or it could be Caucasian.
Oh, I see.
Right.
I see. Okay.
With that, I think we will now let Jed, you could talk, next slide, please.
Thanks. I'm going to speak quickly on, I guess, how this plan all comes together, and give a little bit more detail about our rationale in presenting it, the form that we did to the commission. And it really talk about it and how it meets our obligations to not only our license conditions, the statute, the regulations, but also to the host community agreement. And that's a little different than Certainly the plans that you've looked at before, we have a foundation, and in many respects, the plan itself that we're presenting, certainly these goals, are all established through our host community agreement for the most part. And it's really, structurally, our plan really tracks the HCA model is intended to cover our commitments to women, minorities, and veterans in the design and construction phases, and as Mary Kate has pointed out, the operations phase. We think that it makes a lot of sense to keep these things linked and brought forward in a comprehensive plan as we did, really because of two core pieces, and I would suggest sort of the most important things that is in the document that's before you, and that is the establishment of the goals and then how we're going to manage those goals. And to me, the compliance plan, that is the essential two elements, not the only two. We provide a lot of other detail on how we're going to meet those goals. Some of the programs, certainly not all. We certainly are reserving our ability to pivot and move on to other types of programs that may be appropriate for us to use there. But really, both for design and construction and operations, the goals and the way we're going to manage those goals is going to be consistent throughout. In addition, the affirmative marking obligations are targeted to the same groups for both design and construction and operation, and we feel that it makes a lot of sense from an efficiency perspective to approach it consistently and to have some continuity in connection with these obligations. It's also important, I think, for all these obligations to be brought together forward as a total commitment to diversity and not segregated based on necessarily the phases. And I think, as you're going to hear a little bit from Mr. Mathis, operations hiring is going to be an ongoing process. And that's something that we want the certainty of understanding sort of our goals and have the commission understanding what we're trying to achieve in connection with those goals. And finally, just from a management compliance perspective, we do like the idea of having a single plan. We think that makes it more efficient, certainly for us to have a master document that we're all working off of. So we can go to the next slide. So this chart is just for the commission's
Jed, could I
clarification.
just on one thing, I was going to bring this up at a later place, but you talked about the HCA in effect being a constraint on your standards, and it's several points, I think. Certainly, I remember, for example, one point where the document refers to best practices, and one of the comments said, we'd like to see maximum efforts, and you said, well, we can't do that because the HCA says best practices. I think using the HCA as an excuse not to set a higher standard is a little lame. I mean, if you can't go lower than that, but just like you did on veterans, you went up from 2 to 4 on veterans and didn't.
Absolutely, Chairman. And I think, I don't want to.
It's disingenuous to put it in here saying we can't do that because it's the HCA.
No, I want to be clear. What we're coming to you today is establishing essentially, what the floor of those obligations are. So it's not a lame excuse. It's not a constraint.
Well, it says it can't be unilaterally changed.
No, I think what we're trying to do is make it consistent, certainly with the host community agreement. And I think where some of those discussions came around is in the use of certain terms. And we are actually proposing sort of a consistency in the way we approach this, best efforts for the HCA best efforts here. I mean, certainly our intent, and I think as Mr. Mathis has said, is to do a great job, and I think you've seen some of that, in Penn's performance, and we'd like to, meet those standards. But certainly for establishing, what the goals are, we have to have a number, a starting point for the purposes of these. Some of those are set for us by statute, certainly on the labor side in connection with the reference to Administrative Bulletin 14. But then the other goals we've set through the HCA, which, I also want to stress that was a document that was done, with the folks that are responsible for the interests of the city of Springfield. So I think that it does have import, and I think those numbers are certainly meaningful as well. So it is a I say sort of a starting point. It's what we're absolutely required to meet, but I think I'm fine in saying that's just that, and we hope to certainly excel in this area, as I think the company's performance has shown over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'm very mindful not to set goals that we can't meet. And I saw in earlier presentations that despite significant efforts that potentially given where we are geographically and given some of the labor gap in that market, is going to take a lot of work. So I'd prefer to set the goals that we got the city of Springfield comfortable with, who I think is most vested in our program, and to exceed those. But we're certainly open to any discussions about any other parameters or standards that you'd like to apply. For us, best efforts is a extremely high standard, and we stand behind it.
Yeah, that response I don't have a problem with, but there is language in here that suggests we can't do this because of the HCA, and I don't think that's really quite right. I get that you want to say, you're saying this is a floor, this is a minimum, we're committed to this, and if we're, I get all that. Anyway, I made my point.
And Chairman, I think it's more of a consistency aspect, certainly as opposed to looking at that as a crutch and an excuse. Again, that's where we started. That's what we came up with in connection with our partners with the city of Springfield, and that's where we're going to move off of.
And if I may, Chairman, I'd just like to understand, are you referring to language in the program itself or in some of the other materials that we provided in regards to the responses?
I've got some of, we'll get to them. I've got some of them tabbed here, but
Okay.
this has been enough time on this one.
Thank you.
With that, I just, the last piece is, we plan to wrap in that program, unique program for marketing to the unemployed in our partnership with the Office of Labor and Workforce Development. We've kept a sort of space here for us to just add that in, and we fully understand that will come back before you for your review and approval, so.
Okay.
Thanks. Yep.
You done,
Craft next?
Jed?
You can move on.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that, next slide, and we'd like to have Mike close us out, please.
Yeah, this speaks to the organizational chart that we've implemented in the program, and as the oversight on the program. And I think the takeaway here is that, myself included, we intend to manage this at a very senior level. It's an important program for us, both within MGM Resorts, because we answer to that very important board committee, which includes our chairman, but also with respect to giving you an assurance that we are managing this at a very high level. And I think you'll note to the right, if you can, yep, we're proposing 2 external advisors that would be part of the board, analogous to an independent auditor or independent director in a board context, to help us manage this process and make sure that we're implementing best practices and best efforts. So that's in the program, and I thought it was worth highlighting in terms of our commitment on this issue.
Is there a reason you're outside the box?
I just think that it's showing that the reporting structure, but trust me, I'm in the box.
Yeah. Commissioner Stebbins, Jerry's direct supervisor is Hunter Clayton,
Correct.
who is in the box. So, this is going to be a team effort. This does not reflect all the resources we're going to bring to bear on the program. It's just the committee itself.
In all deference to Chair, I mean,
Yeah.
it stands out.
Okay, thank
You
you.
think outside the box, but we don't want you figuratively outside the box.
That's right.
I'll bring that up to Mr. Clayton when I see him.
All right.
Commissioner, I do want to.
Don't get me in trouble.
I do want to make a distinction there as well. Jerry is.
That's true.
Yeah, is part of our compliance team. So fully integrated and play an incredibly important part, including in areas of early intervention, certainly over the aspects of the plan that she's required to manage from a contractual perspective.
Mike, I think you have
Yeah,
one more
next slide, please. This one I need you to zoom out, if you could. Yep, a little bit more. Thank you. So I asked the team to put this together. It's very early. This is our report card, so to speak, on the operational side. Thanks to the efforts of Director Wells and her licensing team, we've brought on our first 5 employees of MGM Springfield effective January 12th. That was a huge milestone for the project and for me personally, with myself included as 6 employees. And this is the type of report card that I'm gonna be asking for internally across all different areas: construction, operations, applicant pool, and this is the type of information we would look to share with you real time. So just in terms of a snapshot of our 6 employees, and I think Commissioner McHugh, this will highlight the way we handle this multiple classification issue. So we've got 6 employees, 4 of them, or 2/3, are female, as noted on the gendered pie chart. Of our 6 employees, half of them are diverse. And also of our 6 employees, 4 of them are from within Western Massachusetts from a residency requirement. 2 of them are Springfield residents. So we're at a third of our 35% compliance requirement on Springfield residents. Obviously, this is not a big enough field to show that we're gonna ultimately get there, but this is the type of monitoring that we're gonna do real time. So, for example, one of the things that stuck out to me is we need to be focused on bringing Hispanic team members on in the next wave, for example. One of the things that stood out to me is we need to be thinking about veterans for the next wave. So we will continue to provide this information to you, and frankly, if we're falling short, I think this is a collective effort, and I know Commissioner Stebbins and Director Griffin will provide us many resources, but we'll tell you when we're falling short and look for assistance and guidance, and we don't think we can do this on our own. So, but transparency, I think, is important, and we're off to a really good start. And we will be doing an announcement to detail those hires next week, but they're folks that you saw when you're in our local office. They're young men and women that have been part of this team for 2-3 years, and they're reflective of the community, and they'll continue to be reflective of the community. So I think with that, that is the conclusion of our program, the summary of our program. There's a very extensive document with the highlights that Jill referenced, and for no other reason that we've got a full complement of our team here, I'd ask if it's appropriate to get a vote to approve it, or at a minimum to make sure that we've answered enough of your questions that perhaps we're in a position to get it approved at the next hearing.
So if I could summarize some highlights and maybe areas of clarification. During design and construction, MGM has committed to oversight and monitoring of the workforce and vendor diversity from the highest levels of the organization, including President Mathis. They have established a diversity compliance team. They've established an MGM Springfield Diversity Committee to monitor overall compliance, monitor effectiveness of training and outreach, and make recommendations to the diversity compliance team. Their on-the-ground monitoring appears strong as well. They have assigned Jerry, the Executive Director for Diversity and Contracts, for the day-to-day compliance, and she will bring on 2 independent external diversity advisors. I remember my first week on the job, one of our community advocates, Lou Finfer, said, you know, are the casinos going to be hiring external monitors? So I was glad to see this in the program. One area of concern I had with the revision, and I think Jerry mentioned a clarification, but I would like to really highlight it. The plan looks as if there is a combined design and construction goal, or goals during construction. And I think what you clarified was those goals are for each phase, design, separate, and then construction. So I do want to clarify that
That's correct.
if the plan is voted on and approved, that that be clarified.
So the bottom line there is we'd get separate measurements for design and separate measurements for construction, each of which would conform to the goals.
Correct, and MGM has committed to reporting on the design separate from the construction and has separate, not combined goals. So I was concerned that they were combining the two, that's all.
Well, just to be clear, we were combining them, but you asked us to separate them, and we're happy to do that.
I wasn't gonna emphasize that point, but thank you.
We've had some really good conversations over the last couple weeks.
She doesn't look it, but she's very scary. Director Griffin is.
Correct.
There's supplier diversity goals for construction, total 17% combined. And, when compared to the state goals, which have a combined MBE and WBE goal, combined goal of 10.4%, I really have to applaud them. I think reasonable, aspirational, so I think that's great. They adopted the workforce diversity goals for construction, the state goals, but they also included an 8% goal for veterans, which is higher, so that was interesting. I know Commissioner Stebbins, you took note of the advertising and promoting the business opportunities and outreach sessions and vendor fairs that they've committed to, and also committed to providing training for the business entities regarding best practices in business. Additionally, one of the concerns about not having as many certified minority, women, and veteran companies, they tackled this by providing assistance or committing to provide assistance in helping these businesses get certified. So that was good. And then the operations phase, I think I look forward to your future work with the Department of Labor and Workforce Development and the Career Centers for additional information. I appreciate the frontline training, the job readiness training, and ESOL commitments to your employees, and also the information about apprenticeships. I think this is a strong plan. I look forward to more information in the operational phase in the months to come.
Great. I just want to say and compliment Jill. The last week and a half, anytime I've called her, she says, I'm on the line with MGM. I can't talk to you right now. So I appreciate all her efforts. I appreciate the efforts of MGM in taking into consideration a lot of the comments and feedback Jill has gotten from our stakeholders kind of across the board. I have a couple of questions, if I can dive into a little bit of detail on within the plan, if that's all right. And first of all, compliment you on the kind of compliance and oversight structure that you've had in place. It sounds like it's consistent through all of MGM's projects as you pursue new developments. Appreciate the fact that somebody at your level, Mike, is involved in the compliance piece to it. There was some language in there about, Jerry, it sounded almost like you are only involved during the construction phase. And if that's the case, who does the responsibility shift to for compliance after the construction phase is over? Or maybe I'm reading this incorrectly.
My focus is construction phase. However, the program, which is why we felt that it was a strong presentation to have it combined, the model and all of the tracking and aspects will be in place, and
Okay.
it will continue on through the operations phase. The specific person, and I have a counterpart within the organization, and I don't know if that person will be I'm sure she will be involved in this as well, but there may be another project-specific person too. I can't speak to that fully right now, unless Mike can.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting question because I think you've seen some of our corporate stats. We're 64% diverse across 62,000 employees. We have a third of our management are diverse employees. So it's something that's so institutionalized that I don't think once we open, we have such great rates of retention that it's not something we feel like we need to actively manage. But that said, we understand our obligations in the context of the host community agreement, for example, is continuing as a separate operations requirement. So I think what we'll do is we'll come back for the April submission and articulate that for you.
Okay. And one of the issues you raised in this is talking about the certification process for some of these businesses. And I know that you're dealing in a region which has a very low percentage of registered minority and women-owned businesses. It's a challenge. I think I've had some internal conversations with our legal team about in the licensing process, how can somebody begin to get their business license to do business with you and at the same time pursuing on a separate track their certification, so they're not waiting to have one before they go off and do the other. But still, again, at some point when the certification is complete, we allow you to count those as your MB and WB participation. One of the other commitments that has been made in terms of workforce is that, if I do my math right, another 55% of your employees are going to come from the greater region. So the 35% within Springfield, I think it's another 55% from the greater region.
That's right.
And 10%
The Mike
outside.
Mathises of the world.
That's right. That's right. We're going to flip that residency quotient a little bit eventually.
I'll just point out, this is how specific detailed the HCA is, to the credit of the Springfield team. Because the issue is, if I move to Springfield, do I then check that box? And the answer is no. As of the date of hire, the person had to have been a resident for at least 6 months. So that's how well thought out and how restrictive those obligations are, for example. But you're right, another 55% from Western Mass.
Right. And again, that just kind of, and I've shared this with Jill, I applaud what you've done. I think this is, as I was talking to Jill earlier, it's interesting. We want this to be kind of an open plan. We want it to be flexible as you move ahead, be flexible as you begin to work with new community partners, take on different strategies. We want this to be more of a living document. On the flip side, and maybe I'll attribute this to Jed, it's also more of a legal document and understand that purpose as well. Where I come down right now, I'm very comfortable with giving go-ahead on the design and construction piece of this, but I would suggest or make us think about holding off on approval of the operational piece until some of the workforce training, planning, and strategies that Mary Kate's working on kind of come to fruition. I mean, there's nothing in here that raises an eyebrow, but I think it'd be appropriate to think about that workforce development plan and this diversity piece of it for the operational plan kind of coming together, and it sounds like your plan is to do that in the next few months anyways. But I would certainly endorse the first two pieces of it for design and construction.
Commissioner, I'll react to that first, and I think,
I knew you would.
And again, just talk about sort of, I think, what the document is intended to do and what it's not. And it's not intended to be a laundry list of absolutely every program, every effort, every person that's going to be involved in these efforts. What it's really designed to do is set forth sort of the expectations and give you a confidence level that those goals are going to be managed in a certain way. And I think I take sort of your comment about wanting to have the flexibility, and I think about some of the comments that were made sort of throughout the process back with Jill and getting through a lot of stakeholders. I think the plan is not going to be designed to be, again, that laundry list. I think we want to have the flexibility to say, this is working really well. or maybe something is working really well at another property, or, you know, maybe we're coming up really short here and we have to add additional resources or programs in order to meet those. So I think, you know, I think what we're ultimately asking for is, on the operations side, is really an endorsement of what the goals and the management structure, and not absolutely every program that we're going to do in order to implement it. And when I think about sort of the discretion and the managerial discretion that we want to have to be able to switch those things out, I think we're never going to get, I think, a document that's going to, you know, certainly satisfy some of the folks that have been critical that we don't have that level of detail there. But we don't for a reason, and that is that we want to have every tool available for us, and we want to be able to switch those tools out as we move through this process.
Could I
questions?
suggest, actually, Commissioner Stebbins, one alternative may be to approve the entire plan with the condition that you rediscuss the operations portion when they come back for the plan for the unemployed in the spring. That may be an option.
We also, I believe, have a license condition which talks about we have the opportunity to sit down with our licensee and their GC or construction manager at the time they're selected to kind of walk through some of these diversity goals as well.
Commissioner, that's correct. I can't recall off the top of my head. I think it's one of the last few conditions on the license. But again, I think that, you know, this plan is dynamic to certainly, if something comes out of those particular discussions in that obligation, can be wrapped in, understanding sort of that we're just looking for really some certainty around the goals and certainty around our overall oversight and management of the plan.
Which, again, I think are extremely strong. I think my initial reaction, and I appreciate you pointing that out, my initial reaction was I was hoping to see more meat on the bones of this plan. Not to say there isn't a lot, and please don't think that this anyway questions at least my impressions of MGM's strong record on diversity. But you know, as long as we're kind of comfortable, we know where ultimately we need to be. There are other pieces to this plan and proposal that need to happen. I might be willing to entertain Jill's recommendation. Another quick question, and Jill, just fill me in, only because you're doing a lot of work on the Access and Opportunity Group. Where's the linkage with MGM and their oversight, audit role and staffing in this respect?
In the document, MGM commits to participating in the Access and Opportunity Committee, and they've assigned a representative. Is it Seth?
Seth Stratton.
Stratton,
Yeah.
to be the representative in the Access and Opportunity Committee.
And Commissioner, I do want to point out one of the changes we made through our discussions, well, is to add a specific commitment to participate with all advisory groups. So again, you know, I think the strength of our plan is that, you know, we're committing to the ones that exist today, and if the commission in a year has a new one, we plug it in.
Okay, thanks.
I'd be comfortable approving because of their track record, frankly, and how many years they've been paying attention to these issues. And also, I'm impressed with the commitment to apprenticeships, training for those who do not have the skills presently, and thirdly, the assistance with certifications. Those are impressive pieces of this plan, I think.
Other questions? Okay. I've got just a few quick ones. Jill or Commissioner Stebbins, have you looked through the exclusions issue? I know this is kind of an industry standard, and it could be a way to sort of defeat the purpose here. Have you guys looked at that in any systematic way?
That was an attachment, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a clause of their, in Article 7, it says we're going to adopt the AGA exclusions, and then in Appendix D, the exclusions are listed, which for the most part, I think, are sort of logical. although there are some, travel agency commissions, insurance and claims, even entertainment, I think is interesting. I just wonder whether you guys had looked through that and felt comfortable with it.
So we have looked through it. The AGA exclusions, the commission voted on, when they voted on the Penn
On
National.
pens, right.
And,
Right, yeah, good point.
And MGM actually has instituted a process. And could you describe that process?
Oh, sure, yeah, I mean, there certainly is a clause in our plan too, where we may come to you and propose an additional exclusion that's not unilateral, that would require us to provide notice and provide an opportunity essentially for the commission to approve. So it's just an additional thing here, but, we really, that sort of, harping on Jill's point, I think we felt comfortable putting this forward because it's being what's being applied to the other licensing.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, and just to answer your question, I guess one of the sections in that list that just kind of I looked more deeply on. Jill and I haven't sat down and looked at this list, but it was more the spend categories that are currently excluded but now needed to be included. I think there was a lot of opportunity in those categories where we could have a conversation. But those are the external travel agencies, seminars and training in some of those categories.
Right. And locally, we may have businesses in some of the categories, and we could have that conversation.
I mean, since we've adopted it once, as a cursory look, it seems reasonable. Something we might just think about, particularly Commissioner Stebbins, with your expertise and focus. Once we get up and running, we might talk with the AGA and others to see is that list still current? Does it still make sense? Sometimes these things kind of get locked in stone and don't ever get rethought.
That's a great idea.
Just for the record, 6.8 and 7.1 are places where you use the HCA as a reason to justify something, which I think doesn't really make sense, but let's not revisit that, but you can take a look at 6.8 and 7.1.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Commissioner Stebbins, do you want to offer a vote?
Sure. Mr. Chair, I would recommend that the commission give approval to the affirmative marketing program for design and construction and operations as presented by MGM. Subject to, Jill, you would phrase it.
Well, I was going to add, did you want to ask them to further clarify the design and construction goals in the document?
Yes. Further refinement of design and construction diversity.
And reporting.
In reporting, and again, for this to be followed up by a training and education strategy for the region.
Plan for the unemployed.
Plan for the unemployed
spring
within
of
the next
2015.
4 or 5 months. I thought you had talked the end of the year, but
It's more than just the training. It's a more, I think their whole idea was in April or whenever they were going to come back with a more fleshed out plan, which would include the training, but a bunch of other stuff too. So it was my impression.
Right.
So it was sort of subject to an amendment in April or whenever.
Correct.
So does that boil down to an approval in principle with clarifications and amendments to come? Is that what the thrust of this motion is?
That's the thrust of my motion.
Okay. All right. I mean, it's important for everybody to understand, I think, what we're doing.
I mean, I think just to be particular, there's a specific license condition regarding a marketing program for the unemployed, which we're suggesting will be added to this, come to you for approval. I think as we move forward, certainly, and start putting, as you put, Commissioner Stebbins, meat on the bones when it comes to our programs, that to me is an ongoing process that we're going to have with Jill, and we're happy to come back in and make presentations on those efforts whenever the commission desires.
I personally think it would be helpful. I also know that that condition required participation from Executive Office, Labor and Workforce Development, who is going through a transition right now, and may need some time to stop drinking from the fire hose before they look at your plan and think about it.
Second?
Second.
Second what?
Well,
I got it. All
Commissioner
right.
McHugh's shortened motion.
Right. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Let's take a very quick break, and we'll come back for item 7 in just a second.
Thank you.
All right, we are ready to reconvene. We are at agenda item number 7, Legal Division, Catherine Blue, General Counsel.
In your packet today, the first of a series of policies that talk about how the commission will deal with its records. And we think it's important that we sort of describe and then quantify the policies that we have regarding the many records that the commission has. So the first place to start and the most appropriate place to start would be to define what those records are. And that's the first policy in your packet. It's called Records of the Commission. And the purpose of the policy is to define what the records are. The records of the commission are all the documents that are created by, filed by, received by, or filed with the commission. In the second part of this, the second purpose of this policy, too, is to support what is
Catherine,
in...
excuse me. We have no picture on the monitor here. Is it up on the... It's on the web? Okay.
And the second purpose of the policy, too, is to support our statute, because our statute does specifically talk about the secretary of the commission being responsible for the records of the commission. So this is to provide some guidance to that portion of our statute and also to define it. And so what you'll see in the first policy is we define our records, we talk about where they're stored, which is at the commission's offices, we talk about when they'll be archived and how they'll be archived. And we do mention for the first time our record retention policy, which will be coming to you at the next commission meeting. So that's a further piece of this policy. And then the second policy that you have behind it is a redaction policy. We've often talked about redacting public records. This policy basically quantifies how we will treat redactions when we get requests for our records, which are public records, and gives a little bit more specificity to how we handle that. So we're asking the commission to take a look at these policies. Let us talk about any questions or concerns you may have. And then we're asking for a vote on them, and we'll move to the next policies at the next commission meeting.
Questions, thoughts?
Well, insofar as the records of the commission are concerned, insofar as both policies are concerned, I'm satisfied with them. But I do think that in the records of the commission policy, there is a discussion of storage, where they're stored, how they're labeled, the scanning process, the training process, and I really think that is very much of a work in progress. I don't know, I think it's very much of a work in progress, so let me put a period there. I think that if we approve this policy today, that we ought to make, and I would request that any motion to approve it include a commitment to revisit this issue in whatever is a reasonable period of time, to have training conducted, have the specific places where we're going to store electronic paper records laid out, to get everybody up to speed on this as quickly as possible, because if we don't do that, then we have a policy without implementation, and there probably can't be anything worse. So that, I think it's a good policy. But I really think we need to get it implemented. We started with the implementation process, or put a structure for an implementation process in place during the move when we all categorized records and the like. But we haven't done it rigorously since we did move. I don't think most of us really are thinking about central filing of paper records. And I think we need to do that. And then we need to have those thoughts combined with where are we going to be down the line when we get to the document management system. So we need to get the CIO in there, not right now, and maybe we have some protocols where the scanned records can be filed on one of the drives that's accessible to everybody using, there's a lot of ways to go. But I do think we need to take and make a commitment to take the next step promptly after we approve this policy and revisit it at a commission meeting to ensure that we are and keep revisiting it until we get it done.
Would you make that part of the motion?
I would.
Yeah, okay. Other comments on either policy?
Well, I agree with everything that Commissioner McHugh states. I would add the very minute point that in our other policies, we also have a date that we've approved them, which is always helpful to me, and maybe we can have a little bit of that track or history in a couple of these important policies, especially on the heels of what Commissioner McHugh is talking about.
We will add that. But this is designed to take the same format as our other policies, and it will be included with those policies, so we'll add a signature line and a date
Right.
as well.
Anybody else? That's good. Commissioner McHugh, want to try a motion?
Okay, let's do them separately. I move that we, the commission adopt as a commission policy the policy defining records of the commission, and that the commission revisit the policy to determine the extent to which it's been implemented and the degree to which it's been implemented and the remaining implementation details in a meeting 2 months from today, approximately 2 months from today.
Second.
Is it, before I make that final, is that a reasonable thing to propose?
It is.
Okay. So approximately 2 months from today. Second.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
So the next item under legal is the small business impact
Wait a second,
statement.
I'm sorry, we just did
Oh.
one of
I
the
just did
policies.
Oh, we
one
just
of the
did one,
two.
I'm sorry.
Right. So is there anything further to say about that, General Counsel Blue, about the redaction policy?
No, the redaction policy tracks what we do now and tracks the statute as well.
Okay. Then I move that the policy statement entitled Redaction of Public Records of the Committee, as it appears in the commission packet, be adopted.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Now,
So the next document in your package is the small business impact statement. It is for our Regulation 205 CMR 129. This is the transfer of interest. This regulation has come before the commission in informal mode. We are now using this to start the formal process. We've filed the regulation with the Local Government Advisory Committee. This is the initial small business impact statement filing. Once we file this with the regs, we'll start the formal process. We anticipate scheduling this for a hearing sometime in early March, end of February, early March. So that regulation has no impact on small businesses. It is predominantly for the transfer of our gaming licenses. And
I move that the commission approve the small business impact statement with respect to 205 CMR 129, transfer of interest.
second.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Did we get any comments on these regulations as part of the informal process?
We did not. So I expect comments through the formal process.
Great.
And now, item number 8, research and responsible gambling.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Last but not least, right?
Yeah.
I'm bringing before you today the first draft of regulations for play management. In December, the commission approved on a test basis, specifically for our Category 2 licensee play management system. At the last meeting on January 8th, the specific requirements of that play management system were approved. And so from that point, then we moved to taking that to the next step, which is drafting that into regulation, taking those specific requirements and drafting it into regulation, which is what you have before you today. And you'll notice that the regulation actually falls in two sections. It falls in 205 CMR 143 for gaming devices and electronic gaming equipment. And it also falls into 205 CMR 138, which deals with complementary services or items and promotional gaming credits. It's split into those two areas because some of the features within the play management system are technical in nature and some are not, and it deals more with the complementary or player services. And so the most logical way to do it was to make sure that it's reflected into both, but the two regulations speak to each other. I think perhaps Council Grossman has a better term for that, but those are my words and how I'm able to wrap my head around it. I believe that the draft regulations that you have before you reflect the important elements of the features that were discussed and brought before the Commission on January 8th, and I'm welcome to any feedback or discussion about them.
I do have a couple of questions or feedback.
Okay.
Questions and feedback, if I can. We did talk a couple of times about the test basis of these regulations, but the current draft does not, in my read of these, speak to that. Was that a concerted effort, or is there something that is there somewhere, somehow, that we can write that this is on a test basis?
It's a very good question. How do you accurately, within the context of a regulation,
Right.
indicate that it's on a test basis, that there is a potential sunset period on this?
Correct.
Council?
Well, before, can I build on that question? Because
Yeah.
I had a question aimed at that as well. I have a couple of substantive questions, but they're minor overall.
Okay.
I think this is a good first draft of an attempt to capture some principles that we talked about last time. But insofar as the test is concerned, it seems to me that as we get down to a granular level, we ought to have in mind what we're testing for and what the testing protocol is going to look like, so that we have a set of regulations that match the test and the testing protocol. So it seems to me that this is a good discussion item today to see if we've accurately captured in some form the principles that we talked about the last time. And, but that we ought not finalize the regulations until we know why we have various elements. For example, we have a repetitive invitation to sign up for this protocol. Maybe that's a good idea, maybe that's not a good idea. We didn't really spell that out the last time. But is that something that we're going to test for? Are we going to test, for example, to see how many people don't sign up the first time but do sign up deeper into it, and what those people, why do those people sign up later rather than earlier? If we're not, are we putting something in there that may interfere with the accuracy of other testing we're doing, measurements we're doing? In other words, if we have a repetitive thing and people jump on at the third invitation to do so, what does that tell us about something we want to know? I don't know the answer to any of those questions. I don't even know if they're relevant questions. But that's just designed to illustrate my concern.
Yeah. And I agree with that we would, in the evaluation protocol, want to build in that we would be able to test for specific features that would be outlined within the regulation. I've thought of this as kind of, this is the starting point. You have to build it, you have to have you have to create it in some way, and so this is our starting point. From there, the evaluation determines what pieces, if any, are effective and what perhaps needs to be revised as we move forward.
Well, I'm going to make
If I
the...
can just follow up on that for 1 second, and then I'll be quiet. That strikes me a little bit like starting to lay the bricks before we figured out what the house is going to look like. So I just stopped there.
Well, I was going to make that point, not in that example, but with another example about the testing. I have a particular, we've had discussions relative just to the 60, 90% figures. It's something that we did discuss, we all agreed, but the nature of the evaluation is going to ask that question. We came up with that well, there's empirical evidence about that 60 and that 90 in other places. That's what they've done. We didn't just come out with that number. But part of the evaluation is going to be focused as to whether that is in fact as effective as we would like it to be.
Effective as what?
To get people to sign up, or to continue to continue to have them at the limit that they desire to initially. If the messages are effective and not, say, overbearing or repetitive or too many. As I understand it, I would like the flexibility in the regulation to set it at whatever that percent may be most effective to the outcome that we want to achieve. It doesn't take away, it actually reinforces the same point that you're making, which I would be, I just highlighted those numbers because even though those were the ones that we discussed, the way I would rather have the regulation read is as determined by the Commission, which we already have done, and we might determine that to be a different thing at a later time, rather than having to re-promulgate regulations.
So if I'm clear, we would likely start off at 60, 90% unless there's some evidence that would tell us to go a different direction, but we wouldn't necessarily state it within the regulation itself. It would be something that would be less specific, but still directed by the Commission.
Right, but it all percolates up to the original point, which is we're all writing a regulation on something that's essentially a test, and how are we going to come back to this with the minimum pain possible, and with enough, how do we draft this with enough flexibility of just what we want to evaluate and accomplish?
My evaluation question, and as a full supporter of this, is a little bit broader than that, because I haven't figured out exactly what we're testing for. I mean, and this goes back to our discussion. Is this a budgeting tool? Is it a problem prevention tool? Is it a combination of both? Is it something else? And it seems to me that if we go to the testing, to try and work on the testing side of this, we have to ask those questions and answer them, and then decide which of these things are useful devices in determining the efficacy of it, given whatever goal we're ultimately trying to reach. Yeah. Otherwise, we have a limit as an end in itself. And maybe that's where we wind up. It's just a good idea to have limits. I'm not convinced of that necessarily, unless the limit serves another purpose.
Well, can I suggest a way to approach this? Clearly, this has to be, one issue is, yes, this is a test. Does that need to be reflected in the regs? I'm not sure that it does. We know it. We'll come back, but that's a question. Do we need somewhere to say this is a test? That's one. Secondly, clearly the regs have to reflect what the program is we are undertaking, and we don't know yet the particulars for sure. And there is some question about defining the objective of the program. We've talked about this at length in the working group.
Right.
You know, that we're going to have a logic model. We're going to, within the next 30 days, we can hope we'll start developing the particulars. So would we be best advised, we could do one of two things. We could write this very flexibly so that there was lots of flexibility. So we say 60, 90, 100, or such other times, incidents, frequencies as the commission should say. We could just write it very flexibly, or we can just wait until we've got this defined. You know, we expect 3 months from now at our next Gaming Research Advisory Committee to have a pretty thorough draft of the particulars of the logic model of the plan, what is it we expect to get out of this, and how will we evaluate it in place. And we could just wait on these regs. If there's, they can't do all their work. You know, Bally and Penn can't do all their work until we've got these details worked out anyway. So maybe there's no need really to work on the regs until we've got all these details worked out. I mean, I think we could, so it's either way, either just write them real flexibly so we can do whatever we want, or let's just wait and do them when this, after the house is built rather than before.
What? There might be some, but we've got a fairly short window after the 3-month period to get these regs in place, right? So it might be worthwhile to at some point, and work out the timeline, put these, or something like these, we talk about specifics here, but something like these in play to solicit comments as part of a placeholder with the public hearing coming after the protocol is developed so that we could quickly change them. There'll be enough discussion and people won't be caught by surprise, and have them take effect soon after the 3-month period, rather than begin the process, which is a 45 or 60-day process.
I think that's sort of de facto where you are at this point. You know, you're sort of putting out a straw man. We would chew on it, and then when we get to the end of the formalization process, the end of the formal hearing process, we would adapt the straw man back to whatever we've actually worked out in the details. I think what Commissioner McHugh says is probably the right way to go, so we don't just put everything off for 90 days.
But we understand this is a straw man.
Right. That's based on our best judgment to date. What about the issue that Commissioner Zuniga raises? Is there some need, you know, conceptually, legally, regulatory-wise, is there some need to put in this that this is a test? Or is that something which we know from the outside, and if the commission makes the decision to change the test or end the test, or to make it widespread, we then act? Is there any advice on that?
I don't think you need to put in here that it's only a test. I think everyone who's involved knows what's going on here. So I think the plan makes sense, and we can modify it as we move ahead.
Yeah, the piece to me that seems important, and it comes back to that flexibility to say if 60 and 90% is not right, it's really 20 and 85, that we could do that, because that would be an element of testing this out. And so that does strike me as something that's very important in this.
Yeah, those I'm sorry. Those numbers, you know, that's one instance. That's the one that's most striking. But there's others.
There's
For
plenty of
example,
others, yeah.
uniformity.
Many of them,
Uniformity is a good principle. It's intuitive, but that could be something that our evaluators tell us. You know, in order to really come up with the best message, you need to test different messages, right? So that you see if there's. I'm just wondering. And by writing that every message has to be uniform across all machines, we might be constraining the very evaluation that we're trying to put forward. So there are other examples that I picked up on, just like that, where the theme of the test, you know, however we write them, as a flexible enough in draft, etc., or after the fact, these are all, you know, part of the constraints that we have to wrestle with.
Once we do get to whatever that date is, when we've got the details as we're going to launch with, We will then reflect that as much as we need to in the final version of the regs. But as the program goes out, as the evaluation takes place, we'll be seeing what's working, what doesn't, and maybe we need to change 60, 90, 100 to some other numbers. So something to think about, Todd, is there something that we could put in the regs which authorizes the commission without changing the regs to change the details of the program? Or maybe we should leave the details of the program out. I'm not quite sure how we should deal with it, but the whole nature of the test and the evaluation is on a real-time basis. We've talked about in our working group about using the medical industry's PI, policy improvement, what's it called?
QI.
Quality improvement, a rolling 90-day cycle of looking back at the data and say, can we amend the program as we go along? So there's going to be a lot of changes in the program.
Well,
we need the flexibility in the regs, so we don't have to change the regs every time we do that.
Well, we need input on that principle, too. I mean, I agree we ought to look into it, but we need comment on that. Because
Yeah,
I'm not sure that how easy it is to change this without, I just think we need input on how easy it is to change the mechanical response to our policy changes without having to run a whole series of stability tests if we do that. In other words, if you change it from at 60% to 40%, do you have to run a set of tests on the machines to make sure the machines aren't going to get fouled up?
But would that affect our regs?
No, it would affect the procedures for changing it.
Right.
So we can get their comment in. We'd have to get their comments and have a period of time for their comments before we change things and created a problem unintentionally in so doing. It's a safety check.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I just offer that as a thought. We're getting into a brand-new area, and we need to think about both the policy end and the machine operation end as we do.
Yeah.
And that's true, I think, of a couple of different components of these regulations, that we do need input on a technological, from a technological perspective as to whether this is workable. The setting of the session period and how all that's going to work. We've gotten some initial feedback from Bally's. So we tried to craft these in a way that they suggested might work. But to Commissioner McHugh's point, I think we need some input from the experts as to how workable some of these principles are.
Mark, aren't you going to have to leave a certain set in place to test it for a certain period of time?
Well, I think that
Need 2 years, or, I mean, there has to be a bit of a period of time.
yeah, and I think that the question about once you set something in motion, how long do you need to have it in place in order to determine how effective it is, goes back to the chairman's point about a short-term QI process to rapid cycle process that may be able to give you that feedback. But really, those are some of the details that would need to be worked out. And the length of time that something would need to be run in order to get enough feedback and to make that decision probably depends a lot on how many people are using it, what is the specific feature, what is the type of data that we're receiving, whether it's very subtle and you're not getting a lot of noise out of it, or whether it's stark and you can make a relatively quick determination. So I think that to me, it really depends. Commissioner McHugh, I had a question. When you said public comment, to me, what I see is a small working group that would include ourselves, Penn, Bally, the evaluator, as kind of the working group that would be driving the way that this looks and how it feels. I don't know if that's what you were speaking of, or whether you were speaking of something broader than that.
I was speaking of the public comment that we typically get when we put out a set of draft regulations for comment, and that we're required to do when we put the regulations out. So,
Yeah, and what I'm thinking here is that we will put out a set of regs when we're ready put out a set of regs, which will be after the baseline system that we're going to start with is ready to go. I will hope that we will be able to put some flexibility in there so that that working group, which will be made up, as you said, of Bally, Penn, us, and the evaluator, can adapt that. If there's big adaptation, like let's drop it, or let's make it mandatory, or let's put in some other stuff, that would be something which we would go through our whole public process. But I would hope that we could have that working team, do the sort of tweaking of the system and figure out can we try a new way? Should we drop this kind of message and use a different message, that we wouldn't have to bring those back to a public comment period.
Right.
Well, it's kind of hard to evaluate that without knowing what we're evaluating.
What the specifics are.
Right.
And it's probably like same thing we've got with our changes in the condition, changes in the building. We delegate to our staff the ability to approve changes that are not material enough to bring them back to the commission. And this would be somewhat similar. If there are things that might really need commission attention or long-term hearing attention, then the staff does that. If it's minor, like moving the Flutie restaurant from one location to another, they would just do it.
Well, yes, that's right. But there are significant consumer protection and other things bound up in this. I get your point.
Okay.
And I'm willing to see how that.
Right.
I had two substantive questions and issues, if we're done with that general topic. And that is in 14301C4. I thought when we were talking about the principles, and I may misremember, that we rejected this.
The quarterly,
That every quarter, this says that every quarter, if you're not participating, you will get a new solicitation on your first use of your player card every quarter.
Right. And I believe what was approved was that there would be periodic, and it was more flexibly written into the memo that we would have the ability to follow up, but it did not specify any timeline. And I believe the feedback that we got from Bally said that it would be really difficult if you had some type of variable time, and they were suggesting that we move to something that would be much more specific. And that's what we tried to capture in here.
Okay. I guess that's right. We were talking about how that message would be delivered. And that's, I guess, what I was thinking of. Okay, that's fine.
We might look at, I was trying to think, I looked at that point too, and I'm thinking of all the times something pops up on the screen when you're in your computer, do you want to do such and such? You say yes or no. But there is a place that says, do you want not to have this question asked anymore? And, in order to keep this not be a pain in the neck for people who judge themselves not to need it, we might think about whether that possible, so that you can opt out of your quarterly notices too if you want to. I'm sort of open-minded on that, but I just think that's worth thinking about.
Well, and that is actually an existing feature
Oh, it is?
of what we hear from
Yeah.
Bally's, if I
Okay.
remember correctly.
Well, that seems to me a guard against becoming an annoyance to people who don't need it. You said you had two, Commissioner?
Yeah, the next one's the number one on the top of the next page, and that goes to this 60/90 thing. I know we agreed on the 60/90 as starters, but I didn't understand from that the machine was going to stop and make you affirmatively say you want to continue at 60 and 90. I did understand it was going to stop at 100 and make you say go forward, and I did understand it was going to stop at 150, 200, and 250 and make you say you want to go forward. But I didn't understand it was going to do it there. And if a person has a $100 limit and you stop the person after 60, as opposed to telling the person they're at 60, I'm not sure I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
I didn't pick that up, but I agree with you. I don't, if we did agree to that, it was not knowingly on my part, I think.
I had it all queued up on my iPad to bring forward, and I ran into a technology problem, so I'm not able to read exactly what was approved at that last meeting. I apologize, but we can certainly, regardless of that can take a look specifically at that.
And the mere fact that it comes up stops the player, and that the player's going to have to do something to keep going. There is, some cooling effect. But to ask the player, you've gone to 60% of your limit, do you want to keep going, seems unnecessary. I agree with that.
I think it comes back to previous discussions we had about what does that message at 60 or 90 or 45, what does that message look like? What does it specifically say, and what is the action? And then that corresponds with what is the action that needs to happen in order to proceed with your play.
I don't think we ever discussed that at the 60, 90 period. I simply assumed that you'd get a message saying, your limit is $1,000, you're at 600, or you have reached 60% of your $1,000 limit, or
That's what I
it was a
assumed.
pure information conveyance.
I think it was an informational notice.
I had one substantive issue too. The player shall not be allowed to change the established setting on the gaming device other than at a kiosk, or you can change it at other places. What is the benefit of that? If you hit your limit and you want to go on, you can play on. So we let you play on, but we don't let you change your limit. Seems to me, if anything, you're in the margins here, but maybe this whole thing is in the margins, but if anything, it would be better to say, well, okay, I want to go up to 150, rather than just say, tell you every 50% thereafter that you've hit a new level.
Yeah, we had a lengthy discussion, as I recall, about
the commission.
Yeah, during the commission meeting in December about where you can enroll in the play management system or tool, and where you can change that. My original recommendation was that there was a 24-hour cooling or 24-hour period before any increases in that limit would take effect. And I think that what was agreed would be that there still needs to be a cooling off, and the intent of that 24 hours was a cooling off period. What we decided, as I recall, and as was reflected in that document, was that there's still a cooling off period, but it would require that you leave the gaming position, you leave the gaming device, and you can still make changes, but those changes would take effect immediately. Still in effect that there's a cooling off period.
So you mean, so the machine does actually stop you at 100%?
No, no, I'm sorry. You can continue to gamble past 100%, certainly, and you would continue. Sorry, if you want to make changes to it, you can't make it from the gaming machine.
Except by playing. You can keep playing.
You can keep playing, and you would receive a note. You would receive further notices at, I believe it's every 50% after the 100%. So it's at 150, 200, et cetera.
Well, consistency being the hobgoblin of small minds, I may have said something the opposite other times, but as I'm thinking about it now, it seems to me that it would be slightly better if if somebody's into it and now they don't want to stop, but they would kind of like to stop. It's a stronger thing to say, okay, I'll go to 150, and to give them the option of putting in another limit rather than not putting in a limit and just giving them a pop-up at every 50% overrun. Logically to me, it seems to me this runs against what we're trying to do. But
Yeah, and we also discussed the instances in which players simply take out the card to do away with, with that.
They lose their rewards, but
No,
yeah.
well, but there's
Yes, I
a
agree.
balance here as to what is the endpoint.
This really gets back to what we're trying to measure. What are we trying to do with this thing? Right? I mean, is this a budgeting device, in which case it's a useful budgeting tool, and we have something consistent with that. If it's a problem gambling device, then maybe stronger measures are warranted.
let me just speak to this because this comes up frequently now, and we
I
need-
say it all the time.
Right.
All right.
We need to start to coalesce around this. And from my understanding was that the notion of saying this is a budgeting tool was a marketing strategy. It was, we don't want to call this a problem gambling tool because nobody likes problem gambling tool. But if you call it a budgeting tool, and then we talked about other things too, the same kind of different language. We talked about calling the problem gaming center the lounge rather. We weren't talking about changing what we were doing. We were talking about using language which was supportive of use. So to my mind, the budgeting tool was just a marketing. What we are trying to do is reach people who may be at risk of getting on the continuum of not at risk to problem gambling and to influencing their behavior. That's what this is about. And there's some percent of people, and we know there's some clinical way to pretty well identify who are people who are at risk. We won't be using those, but there is a group of people who are at-risk gamblers. And we're trying to put in tools that will slow, if not halt, their slide down that progression by putting in these variety of tools. So to me, that's what this is about. This is about slowing or halting the people's movement on the continuum from at-risk to problem gambling. Now, that may not be what we agree on, but that's what I've been thinking.
It's certainly a worthy goal, but then we ought to just forget about, but, okay, that may be a worthy goal.
And we call it a budgeting tool. I mean, in
Wow.
order to get people comfortable with it, we
But we're saying that that's not the case, so how aren't we insulting people's intelligence?
Right.
By saying it's really this, but we're gonna call it this, so we fool them to using it. That doesn't sound right.
Don't we take all of that, I mean, if it's a problem gambling tool, then all of that other program that we've got, responsible gambling, talks about this in a positive way, right? Not as budgeting, but as prevention of problem gambling. That's all of all of our other stuff.
Yeah, I see, it goes back to the overarching idea within Strategy 2 of the responsible gaming framework, which is about informed player choice
decision,
to me.
yeah.
Which is how do you give people information,
Right.
a continuous flow of information about their specific behavior that
Right.
better informs them
Right.
and allows them to make decisions about their behavior. And in this case, it has to do with their decisions whether to keep gambling or stop at that point.
Right.
I think that earlier, Commissioner McHugh, you asked, is it a budgeting tool? Is it a tool that's targeted to impact or reduce harm for at-risk and problem gamblers, or is it both? I feel like it's both. This is a tool that's intended for anybody who comes through the door to use, and you can use it as that sort of budgeting tool, or for everybody that would use it, it's that type of budgeting tool to give them informed player choice.
Right. And if it, and I know I sound like a broken record, but it's really hard for me to get my head around this, because it seems to me that when you settle on the goal, and if the goal is informed player choice, then that drives certain outcomes, right? You're not necessarily dealing with infected people, to use it in a hospital context, that you've got to cordon off from further harm. You're dealing with people who need information in order to make an intelligent decision. And then the question becomes, is the sign-up away, raising the limits away from the machine, a necessary tool or step for them to make an informed choice, right? Or is it not? Or is it overkill and stepping into a prevention problem, a prevention device that is over and beyond simple informed player decision-making? And one can argue that what happens to people a lot is that they're under the spell of the machine, and therefore you've got to break it in order for them to make an informed choice. I mean, you can make that argument. You can also say that all they need to do is make a choice, and you've given them the information with which to make the choice, and you don't have to do anything more. And it's those kinds of things that it seems to me that drive the components of this system. The answers to those kinds of questions that drive the outcome of this system, and that again we need to ask and have some testing wrapped around to see where we're getting.
I think about other measures that we have within the framework and are being considered by the commission now, like the placement of ATM machines, and what is the rationale? You're saying no, we don't think it's appropriate to have an ATM machine next to a slot machine or even on the gaming floor, that we want that to be a certain number of feet off of the gaming floor. The rationale is that it creates albeit very small, but still a cooling off period that allows people to reflect on their gambling behavior and decide what they want to do next. It removes that cloud, and I've thought of this in the same way, that it creates, albeit very small and circumventable, but some type of built-in mini cooling off period if somebody wants to avoid those types of messaging, and increase that limit. Is it effective, and is that the right approach? I think is all great evaluation material that would decide whether or not that's the appropriate route in order to create that cooling off period.
I'm just going to go back to a point you made earlier. I did not take from the discussions from before that we were only calling it a budgeting tool to get us past a stigma or a marketing, notion. I think that was never my understanding. Now, yes, the devil is in the details relative to breaks and informed decision making, and what exactly is that, right? A lot of that is guided by just the what we are going to be testing for and evaluating. But just to come to the point that you made earlier, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that it was never my impression that we were just going to call this a budgeting tool to get us past the stigma of calling it a problem gambling prevention tool.
We've adopted GameSense as our responsible gaming brand, and if we take the lesson from where GameSense originated, they knocked out the terms problem gambling and responsible gaming out of their vocabulary because it was laden with all sorts of value judgments, and so I think language is so very important when we're talking about this, and how patrons will receive the information, and whether it's something that they'll even want to touch or try to use, and it's really important to us.
I agree with that. My point is that was not the reason why we're doing this exclusively.
The informed player choice, though, is...
Informed player choice to what end, Jim? What is the public interest that we're trying to accomplish with informed public player choice?
I suppose we're trying to I'm not sure.
Isn't it healthy choices? I mean, really get people to think about their behavior and make healthy choices.
But implicit in that, implicit in that is that we're trying to keep people healthy, not unhealthy. I don't think we have a public interest in having people adhere to a budget. That's not our job. Our job is to understand that this is an addictive behavior which can cause some people serious trouble. And our job is to try to figure out how do we keep people for whom this might be problematic out of trouble. It's not to get the other 80% of the people to adhere to a budget. You know, that's not we're not interested in that. This is about minimizing harm. You know, if that's what GameSense is all about. GameSense is all about a marketing change in order that you can reach people who might be at risk of getting to harm. So the public interest that we're trying to serve here is to keep people from trouble, you know, and if there's nothing else, there's nothing inherent about budgets that it's our job to protect. I mean, if you live by your budget, you live by your budget. If you don't, you don't. But if you don't live by your budget because you're so compelled that you can't stop when you get to the machine, now you're talking about our problem. Right. So so if you unpack it, you know, what are we trying to do here? What is our public interest that we're trying to protect? To me, that is the public interest, to keep people from getting hurt by gambling. And that helps guide our strategies once we can agree on what that purpose is.
I feel like we're the way I've conceptualized this is that we're offering a range of tools that, and it goes back to the framework again, from casual gamblers that need very little, that the message and the types of tools that they need is different from the person with a gambling disorder. And I would like to see that we offer a host of tools and information that promote responsible gaming and provide some type of information or safety net that would be out there for persons with gambling disorders. We wouldn't be doing that personally as a commission, but that's the intention of the work that we're doing through the Public Health Trust Fund and our work with the Department of Public Health and the Massachusetts Council on Compulsive Gambling, that there's this full range of services from primary prevention that really provides very basic information about risks and responsibilities of gaming. You would put these types of play management tools someplace kind of early on, but it would certainly apply all the way down the spectrum, hopefully. I hope it could, and it really can make a difference down here. But it's also intended to be a tool over here for, or across the board for all people.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And then if you coalesce around that notion, then a lot of the steps in this can be measured against the likelihood that it's going to facilitate, starting with informed choice, the ultimate goal of reducing the risk for people who may be at risk. Right, and then other pieces begin to fall into place. Maybe you do need for those people that this is really aimed at, or at least we find out, if you do need for those people who may be at risk, that break to get up and go raise the limit, rather than raising the limit at the place. Okay, sorry to have told it.
No, not at all. It's really important, and you know, you're right, as you usually are, that so many times situations you don't clarify what your purpose is, and you can't evaluate it if you don't know what you're doing. And it's, you know, it's clear that we are a little vague on our purpose, and it's got to be explicit. And as I said, at the working group, you know, we talked about having what the researchers call a logic model. What is it that we're trying to accomplish, and what are the logical steps in the program that get us to that end, which is precisely what you're trying to get us to do. And if once we've got that, then we can evaluate it. Okay,
we're done.
Are we done with you? Well, I have one last thing that just came up after the agenda, and I just wanted to quick speak to it. After the agenda was set, that just came up in the last couple days, we've all talked a lot about are there issues in the gaming law which need to be addressed by the legislature? And the licensees and applicants various times have submitted a number of things that they thought needed legislative attention. We have reviewed all of those some number of months ago. And to make a long story short, with the exception of the quarry issue, which the whole industry would like to have addressed sometime before big hiring starts, we have reduced, we the commission, reduced the issues that we felt were really urgent for legislative attention to, again, to slightly oversimplify, the requirement that the casino operators stop a slot gambling transaction every time there's a win of $600, and that the gambler pay withholding tax at that time. Again, I'm not saying this perfectly, but just to make the point, and there are subtleties in this. And you authorized me last time to send a letter to the legislature talking about our reaction to all these issues, and in particular focusing on the $600 issue. Now we get to 5.5 months away from launching business at Penn National, and that issue is becoming time sensitive. That's a slots parlor only. It really means a lot to them. I had reached out to the legislature at your direction to say that this is an issue that we want to have directed. They wanted to have us think hard about whether or not this was really a competitive problem. We've done some research with our licensees, and as we had agreed earlier on, it does seem like if we have this imposition that you got to stop the machine, it's called a lockup, every time their $600 is won, and the gambler has to pay the tax, that will create for a number of gamblers enough of a displeasure, enough of a barrier, that they will continue to go where they used to go, which is out of state, or go somewhere else, which is out of state. A few numbers here, just for background information. Penn has estimated, and these are their numbers, I can't obviously attest to them, but they did some pretty serious research with the gaming manufacturers, that the difference between the $1,200 lockup, which is the federal standard in most other jurisdictions, you have to stop the machine and do something at $1,200 rather than $600, will increase the number of, quote, lockups, the number of wins, by 550% from just stopping at the $1,200 benchmark. That would be an additional 156,000 lockups per year at the Penn National facility. With their formula for lost revenue, simply having the machine come offline for 156,000 more times would cost $1.5 million in terms of lost revenue, of which 49% would come to the Commonwealth and the Resource Development Fund, which is $750,000 a year as a consequence of these additional markups. They also say if 5% of slots players didn't like this, thought this was enough of an imposition on their play that they would rather play some other state where they don't have this, that would generate a loss to the state of $6 million in revenue. So if these numbers are anywhere near right in order of magnitude, we're talking about significant numbers, and there is a broad consensus across the industry that this is a competitive problem. We have agreed, and it is clear, absolutely clear, that it's totally out of step with every other jurisdiction, including the Internal Revenue Service. So the House and Senate have said that they would consider this. They want to make sure that there are not other remedies. They want to make sure that the numbers are correct, and they certainly haven't said that they will fix this, but they will consider it. So I just wanted to restate this. I wanted to get the Commission's approval to redraft the backup argument now that I've got more information, and reach out to the legislature and the appropriate officials in the legislature to see if we can get them to support this change. Before we did this last round, we did talk to all three of our licensees, and all three of them agreed that yes, this is the one. This is the only issue which is absolutely critical and that needs to be addressed. There's not a laundry list of issues, it's just this one. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page, and that it was okay with you that I follow up on our previous vote and our previous letter. and continue this conversation.
Well, I take it this is a report you're giving to us about some research that you've done. The previous authorization has not been altered, and it seems to me there is no issue before the commission.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for a vote. I just thought it
Well,
ought to be.
I know, but it just seems to me that there is no issue for commission action today. I'm unaware of any, and I'm saying this simply as a matter of fact, I'm unaware of anything that has altered or hindered or degraded
Our previous
the
position.
previous position that you were authorized to pursue this change vigorously. I'm just unaware of anything factually.
Yes, we've been, we've had this discussion, we've been vocal about it, I've been vocal about this. I'll remind you that there was an HLT analysis along with those, with all those documents that can now be corroborated perhaps with this data. The numbers I remember were much larger, but I suspect that they were taking into account all operations, not just the slots parlor. But I think we've discussed this quite a bit, and this is the one topic that we all agreed on.
Okay. Great, thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yet again unanimous.